Hello, everybody. Welcome. Glad you're here tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. Might go some interesting places tonight. That's why I'm here. So, yeah, let's do it. Let's have another great late night chat.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just it's a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action. All right, everybody. Welcome. We're going to have quite an interesting conversation tonight. I'll be putting international events in proper context like I often do. It should be fun. We should learn a lot and go a lot of interesting places and etc. But before we do that, just a reminder, the way we do these live streams is I give my opening remarks followed by the roll call. And then after that, I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the program, what you need to do is you need to send me a Rumble rant. If you're on the Rumble, you need to cash at me at CalebMoppin22. But the absolute best way to send questions for the second half of the show is to buy me a coffee. That is perfect. You buy me a coffee, boom, comes in. There we go. In terms of announcements, very, very good chance, not finalized yet, but very, 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 very good chance I'll be traveling in the next few days. Down to the wire. Very annoying. And so I have a number of mega videos that are going to premiere on this channel while I'm gone. Basically, every day we're going to have like a mega video that will premiere. You know, one is solidarity with Venezuela, 7 hours. One is 8 hours debunking Trotskyism. And, and I've got I've just thrown together some compilations of old content that'll premiere while I'm gone. So enjoy them. Watch them, share them, engage. That's always fun. And that's while I'm gone. Also, tomorrow evening, I'm supposed to leave Tuesday. Again, not set in stone, down to the wire. My flight might be moved. Oy, oy, oy. But, if I am, regardless, tomorrow night, we're going to do a call-in show where I will put the studio link in the chat. And it'll be open. So if you have a webcam, if you have a phone camera and I can see your face, I can bring you on and we can talk about whatever you want. Tomorrow night is going to be an open phones show. So if you feel like coming on 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow night, we're doing an open phones show. Should be a lot of fun. Then the other thing, and I'll be talking about this as well. So we have put out a call for next Saturday for people to intervene at the No Kings rally. So the Democrat Party is putting on some of their stupid Trump derangement syndrome rallies. And we are calling for people to disrupt those rallies, to follow the law, to not do anything illegal, but to disrupt those rallies, to make a scene, to raise the issue of hands off Venezuela. And this call is taken off like crazy. I am getting messages from people that want to be involved I haven't heard from in a long time, and this is really taken off. So Saturday, the No Kings rallies, we are saying crash the Democrats party and say hands off Venezuela, disrupt. Another thing that I wanted to mention about this is if you go to the No Kings website, these rallies the Democrats are doing for No Kings Day are happening in hundreds of cities, literally. There's no reason that you have to do this in a big city. And in fact, if you're looking to disrupt a No Kings rally to support Venezuela and say hands off Venezuela, you might have better luck doing it in a small town, a small city, because of the fact that they'll be less prepared. You can probably make a bigger splash. So my advice is rather than going to a big city, if you're in a rural area, if you're in a suburb or whatever, find the closest rally to you, where, every little suburb and rural place, every place that there's Democrats, they're having one of these stupid rallies to talk about no kings. My advice is find a small one in your area and go to it. Bring a bullhorn, bring signs, and just make a lot of noise about hands off Venezuela and document it. It's important that you document it and put the video. Send us the video, put the video online. We want to show that it happened. But this is a great opportunity to wreck the Democrats' party, to get a message that actually matters into this stupid No Kings mobilization and try and stop the danger of a new war against Venezuela. And my advice is find a rally near you. No, don't go to some big, huge city. Don't drive 3 hours. Find a rally in your area and go and make a scene and make a splash and document it. That's what we're asking on people to do. Follow the law. Don't get arrested, but disrupt the No Kings mobilizations, the No Kings circus. We put out the call. That is what we are asking for people to do. So if you are, my advice is find a smaller rally, because there's hundreds and hundreds of rallies happening all over the country. You go to the No Kings website, they're happening everywhere. Find a smaller rally, interrupt it, and say, hands off Venezuela, no war with Venezuela. That is our call. So yeah, a lot is happening. I'll be traveling, so watch the mega videos while I'm gone. Tomorrow night, we're doing a call-in show, open phones show. So hop on, join the show tomorrow night. That'll be a lot of fun if you want to join. And on Saturday, go and disrupt the No Kings rally in your area, and with a message of hands off Venezuela. We need Venezuela to know that they've got Americans that support them and are on their side. So yes, tonight, just like every other night, we are going to be following our normal format of first I give my opening remarks, then from there we do a roll call, and then after that I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. Now, you can send questions for the second half of the show. You have 3 options for how to send your questions. Option number 1 is a Rumble rant. You can send a Rumble rant. Option number 2 is Caleb Maupin 22 on Cash App. You can Cash App me. The best way, the absolute best way, is to buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee. You can talk as long as you want. There's no restriction. You can be anonymous if you want to. Buy me a coffee is the best way, the absolute best way to send questions for the second half of the show. Now, before we get to the main topic, tonight I'm going to be talking about the Ukraine hoax, where it came from, etc. But before we get to that, there is another story that we've covered on here extensively. We've covered it here a bit, which is the detention of Holy Mother Hak Jahan Moon. Dr. Hak Jahan is one of the main advocates for peace with North Korea. She is the widow of the late Reverend Sun Myung Moon, and they were advocates of peace with North Korea. They were very anti-communist, but during the Cold War, after the fall of the Soviet Union, 1991, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon and her husband, Reverend Sun Myung Moon, they went to North Korea and they reconciled with Kim Il-sung, and they became major investors in the state-run economy of North Korea. They set up a state-run car company. They set up, they were major investors in North Korea. Now, for whatever reason, there's some trumped up charges. She's 82 years old, and Hak Jahan Moon is sitting in a jail cell in South Korea, and she's in pretrial detention, and they're going to try an 82-year-old woman who just had heart surgery. They're going to try her for bribery. I mean, the whole thing is absolutely absurd and ridiculous. However, we have been protesting around the issue. We've been, raising the issue in demonstrations and calling out what we see as just completely, a bunch of legal malarkey going after an advocate of peace. But there is a new development in the case, which is very, very, very interesting, which is it appears that North Korea is planning, this is the rumor going around, Trump is headed to South Korea at the end of October. All right, that's pretty well understood. Trump's trip to South Korea is coming up at the end of October. The rumor is that there is last-minute negotiations going on for Trump to go to North Korea from South Korea. All right, that Trump really wants to meet with Kim Jong-un again, and that from South Korea, he and the South Korean president will then go to North Korea for another meeting. That's very, very big news. And people are very excited. This is very widespread. You can Google this. There's very widespread. But apparently, it's now going around that North Korea is going to demand that Holy Mother Han be released as a precondition for that meeting. I mean, I don't even know what to believe, but this didn't come from me, folks. I will show you. I couldn't believe this when I heard this. But it's very big, and it makes sense because of the fact that, you know, that the Unification Church and you know, they were main investors in North Korea during the first term of you know, during the 1990s, etc. They're the ones that were largely responsible for Trump and Kim, you know, having their first meeting. And this has been going around. This is a headline, right? That Kim Jong-un may demand the release of Dr. Hoax as a precondition for the meeting. And this is coming from, you know, Dr. Alexander Mansurov, who is a Washington Times Foundation North Korea expert out of Georgetown University. And other people are confirming this, that apparently, as they're trying to arrange this last-minute meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un, when Trump goes to South Korea, he's then going to go up to North Korea for another summit. Amazing, huge. I really hope that happens. But apparently, Kim Jong-un is demanding that Dr. Hoax be released as a precondition for that meeting. Now, I can't confirm this, but I'm seeing the same headline. I saw this headline going around. That's big. That's big and that's important. So, you know, we had a rally, CPI, on October 4th. It was a rally for continuing the peace talks in Russia, but we did raise, you know, Holy Mother Han and the case. We did raise that case at our rally. So I will, you know, I will put the video on the screen of how we raised the case of Dr. Hoax and her, you know, her detention, you know, in South Korea. The campaign calling for her release is called Release the Mother of Peace. That's what it's going around. So we had a speak out for Release the Mother of Peace in New York City. This is how we raised the case in New York City last weekend.
For the American people to really understand, to know, to be aware of what's happening on the other corner, on the other side of the world. Is really, we talk about the mother of peace, Dr. Hoax, who's right now in detention center in South Korea for her work, her activities in support of peace, in support of world peace. She has really brought this nation of America to the corners of the world. She has really made this nation known.
And I want to raise your awareness about what's happening right now in South Korea. Because there is a woman in South Korea who is the leading voice for peace and negotiations with North Korea. Her name is Dr. Hoax. She calls herself the true mother of peace. And right now she is sitting in a jail cell. She's sitting in a jail cell. This is the main advocate of peace in South Korea. The main advocate of negotiating and denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. And she's sitting in a jail cell right now, framed up with some malarkey about a handbag or something like that. The government of South Korea is persecuting one of the main peace voices. But this is something that happens all across the world. It seems like the forces that advocate war and destruction are very desperate to silence people.
So there's no reason that somebody, because of her faith or because of her action for peace around the world, can be held detained in prison. So we're asking for her liberation, her release, her immediate release from prison. We're asking South Korea to be supportive, to really stand up for democracy, to stand up for freedom, to stand up for individual freedom. They have no reason to detain terrorists. You go through whatever they are claiming, there's no foundation, there's no basis. And this elderly woman, more than 83 years old, is detained right now in the South Korean prison. And we really denounce it. Now is the time for the world people, for the children of God, for everyone to stand up, to defend that human dignity, to defend that human liberty, that freedom that every individual should really benefit from.
Yeah. Yeah. This 82-year-old woman is being held in a detention cell with no windows. And I mean, the whole thing is absolutely crazy. And it appears, as I said before, that North Korea is demanding her release as a precondition for the talks, that they're not going to sit down with Donald Trump while one of the main people they've been able to work with, the leader of one of the main movements that's heavily invested in North Korea, is sitting in a jail cell in South Korea. This is all very, very important, and people overlook this. There's a lot of people on the internet who, they love North Korea, they love to be communist, but they're not interested in the nuances of this. They, as far as they're concerned, it's like, oh, the Unification Church are anti-communist, the Unification Church are conservatives, so I don't care about this. Well, I'm telling you, North Korea and the Unification Church are very close. And right now, the leader of the Unification Church, Dr. Hak Jahan, is sitting in a jail cell in South Korea. And all of this is very, 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 very important. And North Korea is very, very close to Russia right now. Very close. North Korean military forces are, fighting and defending Russia, on the battlefield on Donbass. So this is all related, okay? This is all related. This is all tied in with everything else. And so that's why I'm telling you about it. These things are all very, very important. So I just wanted you all to be aware of that situation. So tonight, I'm going to tell you in a rather long, roundabout way, so buckle in, about where the Ukraine hoax came from, why it is that billions and billions of dollars in American taxpayer money are dumped into this ugly war in Ukraine, what is going on in the world and what it's really about, and why I believe the Ukraine hoax may soon be coming to an end. Right? If you turn on American media, you would think that Russia, they were just Putin was having a bad day and he said, I want to kill some Ukrainians, and they just rolled in there and invaded Ukraine. That's not what happened, right? What happened is that in 2014, the United States violently overthrew the Ukrainian government, installed a fanatically anti-Russian government, and that government proceeded to start shelling and killing the people in Donbass. Russia negotiated the Minsk Agreement, the Minsk Accords, to make sure that the people in the eastern regions got their rights protected. And Ukraine did not implement the Minsk Agreement. And ultimately, after 8 years, Russia moved in to protect the people in Donbass, the people who'd been dying round the clock since 2014. And at that point, the United States accused Russia of invading Ukraine and spent billions of dollars, and now hundreds of thousands of people are dead in a war that never should have happened. And I'm going to tell you where this war came from, because there's so much here that is so important to what we talk about on these streams. So much history here and so much reality that we can get to. We're just going to go through it. It'll take me a while, but I'm going to take you through the last 100 years to help you understand how we got here. So I'm going to start with World War I. World War I was a war in which 20 million people died, and it was a horrendous war that never should have happened. World War I was a fight between the colonial powers, the British Empire the French, and eventually the Americans were on one side, and Austria and Germany and Turkey were on the other side. And Diane Keaton just died, the actress, but she was in a movie called Reds, which was a fictionalized kind of a historical account of the founding of the Communist Party of the United States. There's a line from that movie. And, they ask one of the main characters, played by Warren Beatty, why did World War I happen? Why is this war happening? And he says, because Britain and America run the world, and Germany and Austria want a piece of it. That's a good way of putting it. The British, the French, and the Americans were the leading imperialist powers. They were dominating the world economy. They were taking chunks of the developing world, of Africa, Asia, and Latin America as their colonies. And Germany and Austria were rising as imperialist powers, along with Turkey, and they wanted chunks of the world for themselves as well. And they were seizing parts of Africa and parts of Asia for themselves. And there was an inter-imperialist rivalry between the American, British, and French imperialists and the German, Austrian, and Ottoman imperialists. They were fighting for control of the world, for control of the colonial world. And World War I was a war that they called the war to end all wars, because people could not believe how ugly the killing was. Machine guns were used on a widespread scale. Machine guns had been used before, but never on this scale. Poison gas was used. Airplanes were used to drop bombs. World War I was an absolute ugly display of barbarism and destructiveness like humanity had never seen before. And it was in Europe, right? The killing went on largely in France. It was France where the line kept moving through. And it was in the fields of France and Belgium. And, that's where there was this huge amount of killing, trench warfare. And Europe at the time was colonizing the world. And they were saying, we're civilized. We're the civilized people. We're civilized. We're civilized. These people were colonizing these Asians and Africans and Latin Americans, these dark-skinned people. They're inferior. They're barbarians, but we are civilized. And the whole world saw what the civilization that Europe had to offer really was. If that was civilization, World War I was civilization, a lot of people wanted nothing to do with it. If that was what being civilized meant, it was a level of death and killing and man's inhumanity to man and mass murder on. I mean, it was just an orgy of death and killing. And amid that, there was one very, very brilliant thinker who I quote on these streams quite frequently. I just can't stop quoting this because it's so relevant to where we are now, 100 years later, over 100 years later. Rosa Luxemburg. And she said, she was in Germany. She was opposed to the war. She said, this world war is a regression into barbarism. The triumph of imperialism leads to the annihilation of civilization. At first, this happens sporadically for the duration of a modern war. But then, when the period of unlimited wars begins, it progresses toward its inevitable consequences. The triumph of imperialism and the collapse of all civilization, as in ancient Rome, depopulation, desolation, degeneration, a great cemetery. And amid this disaster of World War I, Rosa Luxemburg said, look, this is built in, this is rooted in the economics of the capitalist system. And right now, they need this war because of the economic crisis, but it's going to get to the point where they can't stop having wars. There's going to be unlimited wars, where war is going to become the new normal. And when we get to that point, that'll be a sign that Western civilization is just collapsing. Right? She said World War I was the beginning of a trend that would ultimately lead to the end of Europe. And she was right. Right? That eventually World War I was just the beginning of a process that would eventually lead to war becoming the permanent reality and Europe collapsing as the Roman Empire collapsed. very eerie prediction that Rosa Luxemburg made. Now, what was going on at that time? World War I would never have happened if it wasn't for the Marxist movement. If it wasn't for the fact that all these socialists and communists, these Marxists and the Social Democrat Party and the British Labour Party and the French socialist groups sold out and supported the war. They could have stopped the war, but the German Social Democrats, the British Labourites, the French socialists, they supported World War I. And because they supported it, millions of working people were sent off to die. They could have stopped it, but they went along with it. And they didn't just go along with it. They participated. They actively mobilized for it. And it was an absolute disaster. And at that point, Vladimir Lenin was the leader of a big Marxist group in Russia called the Bolsheviks. And Vladimir Lenin, he basically declared that Marxism was over, that social democracy, as he called it, social democracy, the Second International, was a stinking corpse. And he basically declared that the socialist groups and the European Marxist movement was his enemy. And I always quote this. He said, "Neither we nor anyone else can calculate precisely what portion of the proletariat will follow the social chauvinists and opportunists. This will be revealed only by the struggle, and it will be decided only by the socialist revolution. If we wish to remain socialists, we must go down lower and deeper to the real masses. This is the whole meaning of the struggle against opportunism." And Lenin led this sect, this group of Marxists in Russia, that said the Social Democrats, the Marxist movement of Europe, they are our enemies because they support this war. And we are a completely different thing. We're a completely different movement because they are leading workers off to die. And Lenin came up with a theory called imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And he argued that it was no longer a struggle between the workers and the bosses. It was rather a struggle against imperialism. It was a struggle of the people of the world against the big bankers and monopolies that were trying to seize and carve out the world for themselves. Capitalism has entered a monopolistic stage called imperialism, and that in this period, nationalism could be a good thing, and that nations fighting to be free from the domination of the imperialists could be a good thing. Marxism classically had said, workers of the world unite, there are no nations. However, Lenin said, well, actually, nationalism can be good. And he said, in fact, you may have to enter an alliance with the national capitalists, the national bourgeoisie, to fight against the imperialists. Lenin also developed a new method of organizing, and he organized a political party. There was a party of new type, a democratic centralist organization, a combat party of people who gave the whole of their lives. And in Russia, you had this weird spin-off of communism, this weird spin-off of Marxism with completely different beliefs that said they were organizing against imperialism, that believed nationalism could be good, that was organizing a very disciplined kind of clandestine organization called a Party of New Type. You had this very, very big group in Russia that was nothing like the European Marxist groups and didn't want to be and hated the European Marxist groups because they had supported World War I. And in World War I, Germany was fighting against America and Britain and France. But what other country was aligned with America, Britain, and France? Russia. Russia was aligned with America, Britain, and France. And it was a two-front war. On the Western Front, the Germans were fighting the Americans, the British, and the French. And on the Eastern Front, they were fighting the Russians. And there was a fight going on, and we know that there was a very, very important figure in Germany, right? I'll put his face up here. He's a figure that, honestly, a lot of people don't know about. He's kind of obscure, but he's very, very important in how world events played out, right? And he's a figure that gets overlooked. But this guy was a member of the German parliament. His name was Alexander Parvus. And Alexander Parvus had been born in the Russian Empire, but he moved to Germany and he got elected to the German parliament. He was a socialist, but he sold out. He supported World War I. He supported Germany. and he became a German intelligence officer. And he smuggled weapons to Turkey, and he made millions of dollars as an arms dealer, selling weapons to the Ottoman Empire in Turkey. And that he had been the personal mentor of Leon Trotsky, who eventually became a Bolshevik leader. And that Alexander Parvus was this German Marxist, well-known Marxist writer in Germany, elected to the parliament, supported World War I. And in 1917, the leader of the Bolsheviks was living in Switzerland. Lenin was living in Switzerland, which was a neutral country. And Lenin couldn't go back to Russia because he'd been trying to overthrow the government. He was a radical, but he also couldn't go to any of the other countries because he was opposing World War I. So Switzerland was where Lenin was hanging out because it was neutral in World War I, and it was a safe haven. It was a place where Lenin could be safe. And we know that what happened in February of 1917, there were protests and strikes all over Russia, and the Tsar of Russia stepped down. And then what happened? With the Tsar stepping down, Russia was still fighting in World War I. But this guy got on a train and went to Switzerland and visited Vladimir Lenin and said, "Hey, Lenin, you are against the Russian government. And you want the Russian government to pull out of World War I. And you have a whole network of people. You've got an organization of thousands of people that's against World War I. You have your kind of freak spin-off interpretation of communism, your Bolshevik group. Can we help you go back to Russia and maybe stir up some trouble and get Russia to quit World War I?" And Lenin said, okay. And that Alexander Parvus, the German intelligence officer, arranged for Lenin to go back from Switzerland to Russia because he wanted Russia to pull out of the war. Alexander Parvus was German intelligence. Russia was fighting Germany in the war. So the Germans smuggled Lenin back into Russia and brought Lenin to Russia. And when Lenin got to Russia, he came out with his very famous April Thesis, or April Theses, right? The April Theses, where Lenin came back from exile and he whipped the Bolsheviks into shape. And he said, look, now's the time we're going to become the government. We're going to take power. And he came back from Russia on a train, and he showed up, and he brought with him the April Thesis, the April Theses, plural. And he said, we are going to take power. We're going to become the government. Part of the April Theses was, he said, we're not going to call ourselves social democrats or socialists anymore. We're going to call ourselves communists because we're a different group. And we're going to focus on ending the war, peace, land, and bread. We're going to focus on ending involvement in the war, revolutionary defeatism. And we're going to build a new government on the basis of ending the war. And with the Tsar overthrown, and with the Russian working class in a very revolutionary and fighting mode, the Bolsheviks, under Lenin's leadership, they were involved in all kinds of protests and strikes. They had the July days where they were protesting down with war, trying to end Russian involvement in the war. And then there was an attempted coup by the leader of the military, Kornilov. Kornilov tried to install himself as the military dictatorship, and the Bolsheviks repelled Kornilov's reaction, Kornilov's attempted coup. And then after that, the Bolsheviks were able to take power. Amid all this chaos, amid all these people dying, the Bolsheviks, this weird spin-off, bizarre interpretation of communism that believed in building a highly disciplined organization, that believed in giving the whole of your life, that said nationalism can be good, that said the enemy is imperialism. This bizarre spin-off of communism was able to seize power in Russia in October of 1917. And I'll even put on, this was one of the songs. This is a Bolshevik song called Whirlwinds of Danger. It was originally from Poland. but they, translated it into Russian. This is somebody singing it in English. This is a Bolshevik song. This is one of the songs the Bolsheviks had at the time of the revolution, one of their popular songs. It's called Whirlwinds of Danger.
Whirlwinds of danger are raging around us, overwhelming forces of darkness assail. Still in the fight to see advancing before us, red flag of liberty that yet shall prevail. Then forward, ye workers, freedom awaits you, o'er all the world, on land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. March, march, you toilers, and the world shall be free. Whirlwinds of danger are raging around us, overwhelming forces of darkness assail. Still in the fight, see advancing before us, red flag of liberty that yet shall prevail. Then forward, ye workers, freedom awaits you, o'er all the world, on land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. March, march, you toilers, and the world shall be free. Brothers and sisters in hunger are calling. Shall we be silent to their sorrow and woe? While in the fight, see our comrades are falling up. Then united and conquer the foe. Then forward, ye workers, freedom awaits you, o'er all the world, on land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. March, march, ye toilers, and the world shall be free. Off with the crowns of the tyrants of favor, down in the dust with the prince and the bear. Strike off your chains, sons and daughters of labor. Wake all humanity, for victory is near. Then forward, ye workers, freedom awaits you, o'er all the world, on land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. March, march, you toilers, and the world shall be free. Death to the kings and the rich parasites, tremble before our sacred rage. The old order down we shall strike, crops of the future harvest we will. Then forward, ye workers, freedom awaits you, o'er all the world, on land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. March, march, you toilers, and the world shall be free. Negras tormentas agitan los aires, nubes oscuras no se pueden ver, aunque nos espere el dolor y la muerte. Contra el enemigo nos llama al deber, el bien más preciado es la libertad. Hay que defenderla con fe y con valor.
Yeah. And out of this nightmare, this imperialist bloodbath of World War I, the Bolsheviks became the government. And they got help from the Germans, and they defended the provisional government from the Kornilov reaction. And regardless, they ended up being the government. And they wanted to end Russia's involvement in World War I. However, at the time that they took power, there were some among the Bolsheviks, namely a guy named Trotsky, right? Leon Trotsky. He wanted to keep fighting in World War I. And he said, well, now that we have taken power, we can fight World War I on a revolutionary basis. We're no longer fighting the Germans as allies of the Americans. We're fighting them in the name of communism, and we can keep fighting the Germans. Well, Lenin said, no, we have to sign the treaty. And Trotsky was sent to meet with the Germans to sign the treaty, and he failed to actually do it. And ultimately, Trotsky was forced to step down as the foreign minister of Russia, and they signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And a lot of territory was lost because of the delay in signing the treaty. And after World War I, and after the Russian Civil War, there was a debate about how the Soviet Union should move forward. And there was a big disagreement between two leaders of the Bolsheviks, Trotsky and Stalin. And the difference was over the question of socialism in one country or the permanent revolution. Stalin believed that they could sign treaties and have diplomatic recognition from the West, and then they could build up Russia to be a strong, prosperous country and industrialize. Trotsky, on the other hand, said we need to spread communism into the West, right? We need permanent revolution to spread communism into the Western countries. And Trotsky lost, and Stalin won. Why did Stalin win? Because Stalin understood the people. Stalin was from Georgia, and he had been in seminary school. He'd been learning to be a priest. He had a religious background. He was from a small village in Georgia, in the country of Georgia. And he was among the people in the Russian Empire, and he understood them. Trotsky, on the other hand, was a guy who had spent most of his life living in the Western countries, and he was in awe of the West, and he wasn't really that concerned about Russia. He was concerned about spreading communism to the West where it actually mattered. And the two of them had a big disagreement, and Stalin prevailed. And that many people have accurately pointed out that the rise of Stalin was a shift in Russia. And it was. Things changed. The chaos of the Russian Revolution and the instability was brought to an end. And Stalin represented a new wave, a new level of leadership, a new wave, kind of. And when Stalin prevailed, the Soviet Union began focusing on radically building up its economy, and there were a lot of compromises that were made. They glorified the traditional family. They called it the Soviet family. Abortion was outlawed, and that they built a society that, on the one hand, was very liberal in a sense that women were working in factories alongside men, women were in the military, women were in the government. It was very liberal in the sense that they were building modern machinery and industry, but it was also somewhat conservative in that people were taught to be loyal to the homeland. There was kind of nationalism, loyalty to the country. There was militarism. There was a celebration of the family. They gave medals to women who had more than 10 children to be mother of the Soviet Union. And that the rise of Stalin signified a shift in Russian communism. And Trotsky was very opposed to it. It no longer had the chaos and destructive vibe that Trotsky had attached himself to. It was no longer whirlwinds of danger. It was no longer barricades. It was more about building up the nation, building up the country in opposition to the Western system. As the West is deteriorating in the Great Depression, the Soviet Union very rapidly industrializes and builds the world's largest power plants, the world's largest steel industries, etc. And real economic miracles were happening in the Soviet Union in the 1930s. It was becoming an industrial superpower. And it was becoming a very, very strong, economically industrial, prosperous nation I've shown this clip before, but this illustrates it.
To produce engineers and technicians for the new society, training was expanded. And the communists said women should have equality with men, with equal pay. Ella Shishtir was one of a new generation of women.
Когда Ленин сказал, стране нужна электрификация, а коммунизм это советская...
When Lenin said that communism is Soviet power plus electrification, I decided that I should become an electrical engineer, that was my holy duty. And I didn't want to just draw up plans, I wanted to build an electric power station. That was my mission, and I achieved it.
Она давала мне...
The revolution gave me the right to feel equal to any man. It gave me the right to work, to study what I wanted to study.
Она давала мне право трудиться, учиться так, как я хочу.
Fyodorova was held up as an example to others.
We live so well. Our hearts are so joyful. In no other country are there such happy young people as us. We're the happiest young people. And on behalf of all young people, I want to thank our party and our dear comrade Stalin for this joy that we have. Stalin set a task. Build this or build that. And thanks to the fact that people trusted him and this enthusiasm of young people, it was possible. Remember, this was a country where people were illiterate, lived in virtual darkness, wore birch bark shoes. Even now, I think it's like something out of a fairy tale. How was it possible at one of the most difficult times to raise these great construction sites? It was only possible through the unity of the people and the love of the people for their idol. Because for us, Stalin was an idol.
Teams of young activists were sent to the country.
We went from house to house in search of illiterate people. We made a note of their names. We then found suitable rooms to hold classes in.
Learning to write would open new doors for those trapped at the bottom of society. One woman who couldn't attend classes because of her child at home was helped by Anastasia Denisova.
Я сказала, что вот тебе учебник, вот будешь заниматься.
I said, here's a textbook for you. I'll come to you so you can learn to read at home. I remember vividly that when the baby cried, she carried on writing with one hand while she rocked him with the other. She was so keen to study. I'll always remember her striving for knowledge and enlightenment. It was immense.
For Valentina Mikova and Mikhail Arkhipov, these were the most fulfilling days of their lives.
На строительстве домен был один экскаватор. И то плохой.
There was one excavator at the blast furnace building site, and it wasn't always reliable. So we dug all the foundations by hand.
Понимаете, копошатся люди.
The trench would be teeming with people. One takes the earth, throws it to the level above. The second person throws it to the third to the fourth, up to 5 or 6 levels. That was how we got the earth out of the trench. Then it was taken away in wheelbarrows.
Yeah. And so they're building the country up from nothing. And that the USSR, it's giving expression to something deeper than itself, right? It's becoming the expression of the peoples of Eurasia in their opposition to the Western system, their opposition to the system that created World War I, and their desire for economic growth and expansion. And out of all the chaos of World War I and out of the chaos of the Bolshevik Revolution and against what Trotsky wanted, you have the Soviet Union emerging as this very, very strong country. And they've built kind of a mass movement all over the world that's aligned with them. And at the same time, the Western countries are having the Great Depression. You know, there's mass unemployment, mass hunger in all the Western countries. And out of the crisis in the Western countries, you get the rise of fascism. You get Adolf Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, and you get mass fascist movements that are arising. And so the Soviet Union and the communists create, you know, the Popular Front, the mass anti-fascist mobilizations. And in Britain, they fight against Oswald Mosley, who is a Nazi sympathizer, and they have the Battle of Cable Street in 1936. And in the United States, you know, when the Nazis had a rally in Madison Square Garden, the communists shut it down, and they fought them in Madison Square Garden. And all over the Western world, you know, in Spain, you know, they're sending volunteers to fight fascism in Spain. And this kind of anti-fascist movement that's centered around the Soviet Union and centered around admiration for what the Soviet Union is doing emerges in the world. And, you know, in America, part of anti-fascism is supporting Black people against Jim Crow segregation. You know, in America, the Scottsboro Nine are 5 or 9 African-American men falsely accused of rape. And, you know, the communists champion their cause and support them and eventually get them out of prison. And they were facing the death penalty, and the communists support them. And the Communist Party advocates an end to Jim Crow segregation and is fighting for the rights of African Americans. And that there's this whole movement centered around the Soviet Union that is opposing fascism and admiring the Soviet Union, building labor unions, etc. And then, of course, World War II breaks out. And World War II is a very, very, very ugly war. And during the Second World War, the Soviet Union becomes even more traditional. The Russian Orthodox Church is brought back. And Stalin very much appeals to people's patriotism and faith as the basis for it. And that there, you know, it's a huge mobilization. 27 million people die in the Second World War fighting against fascism. And you know, it's a fight of the entire people, the whole country. The Soviet Union is just mobilized to resist an all-out onslaught by the Nazis. And this is a song that comes out of it. It's called The Sacred War. This is a performance like celebrating the victory over fascism. This is from 2015 in Russia.
Граждане и гражданки Советского Союза, сегодня в 4 часа утра без предъявления каких-либо претензий к Советскому Союзу, без объявления войны, германские войска напали на нашу страну, атаковали наши границы и подвергли бомбежке со своих самолетов наши города.
Yeah. And World War II is an absolute, bloodbath. 27 million people are killed, but the Russians, they destroy the Nazis. And after World War II, communism is wildly popular around the world because the communists were so effective in fighting the Nazis. And in France, the Communist Party is surging in popularity. And, in the colonial world, in China, the communists end up taking power a couple of years later because they defeated the Japanese invaders. And communism becomes wildly, wildly popular after the Second World War as a movement centered around the Soviet Union that had fought fascism very, very effectively. And big chunks of the world, big chunks of Africa are moving toward independence. You have the rise of Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, who is he calls himself an African socialist, and he's aligned with the Soviet Union, and he wants to fight the imperialists. He says he's not a Marxist. He has his own interpretation of African socialism, but he's aligned with the Soviet Union. In the Middle East, you have Ba'athist Arab socialism. Abdel Nasser becomes the leader in Egypt. He's an Arab socialist, and he starts moving Egypt towards socialism, and he builds huge power plants, the Aswan Dam in Egypt, and he's aligned with the Soviet Union. And that all over the world, people that are inspired by the heroism of the Soviet people and their fight against fascism are joining this mass movement that has emerged that's centered around the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union had been at the center of the fight against Hitler. And it has a huge impact, right? And I often use this example. It's one of my favorite examples, is that, I'm from a little town in Ohio, small town in Ohio. And I remember my social studies teacher found a newspaper article from the 1950s in my little town. And the headline was, "Take That, Uncle Joe." And what it was about was the first black family in my little town of Orrville, Ohio. The first black family had bought a house. And the article began with a quote from Stalin, saying that America was a racist country, that America oppressed black people. And the article was this defensive article. Clearly, there is no racism in America. This black family bought a house. So take that, Uncle Joe, take that. And that showed how closely the struggle of black people in America for their liberation, which eventually gave birth to the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Liberation Movement, that was tied in with Stalin, and it was tied in with the Soviet Union. That this mass movement that had been created centered around the Soviet Union, that was fighting for an economy where the banks, factories, and industries were rationally organized to unleash economic growth, mobilizing people to build impoverished countries like China, like North Korea, like Ghana, like Egypt, building themselves up, mobilizing the population to build, breaking out of the domination of Wall Street and building themselves up, modeled and inspired by what Stalin had done in the Soviet Union. This was a mass movement that was taking place all over the world. Millions of people saw that World War II, that fascism was an outgrowth of the Western colonial system, that the Western colonial system was dying, and that the Soviet Union had kicked Hitler's ass and destroyed the Nazis, and they had built their country that had been very poor up into a superpower, and that other countries could do the same thing. Egypt could do the same thing. Ghana could do the same thing. China could do the same thing. North Korea could do the same thing. Whole chunks of the world are breaking out of Western domination after the end of the Second World War, looking to the Soviet Union as inspiration. Black people in America are rebelling against racism. The communists are popular in France and Germany, and there's a huge explosion of anger at the Western system, all inspired by the Soviet Union and their great achievements. This mass movement exists all over the world, and the Western countries, the Western system is under threat. It cannot dominate the world anymore because of what has emerged. And I will put, this is that same song, but I'll show you what the lyrics are. This is the Sacred War, the anthem of the Soviet people defeating fascism.
Война Базиликам грабителям, мучителям людей. Пусть ярость благородная вскипает, как волна, идет война народная, священная война. Пусть ярость благородная вскипает, как волна, идет война народная, священная война. Не смеют крылья черные над родиной летать, поля ее просторные не смеют враг топтать. Пусть ярость благородная вскипает, как волна, идет война народная, священная война. Пусть ярость благородная вскипает, как волна, идет война народная, священная война. Гнилой фашистской нечисти загоним пулю в лоб. Отребью человечества сколотим крепкий круг. Пусть ярость благородная вскипает, как волна, идет война народная, священная война. Пусть ярость благородная вскипает, как волна, идет война народная, священная война. Гнилой фашистской нечисти загоним пулю в лоб. Отребью человечества сколотим крепкий круг. Пусть ярость благородная вскипает, как волна, идет война народная, священная война. Пусть ярость благородная вскипает, как волна, идет война народная, священная война.
All righty. So what is the United States going to do about it? Well, first of all, during the Second World War, in order to try and defeat the Soviet Union, the Nazis, they funded this guy. This is Stepan Bandera, the father of Ukrainian nationalism. And the Nazis gave him guns and weapons to fight against the Soviet Union. And he maintained that Ukraine needed to break away from the Soviet Union. And he committed horrendous war crimes against the people. And he was a Nazi collaborator. And after the Second World War, there were other Ukrainian moves against the Soviet Union. There were armed groups in Ukraine trying to break Ukraine away from the Soviet Union. And in the lead up to the Second World War, the Nazis had been promoting Ukrainian nationalism, promoting this guy. So who else started promoting this guy? Trotsky. Trotsky called for breaking Ukraine away from the Soviet Union. And that became one of Trotsky's positions. He was for an independent Soviet Ukraine, right? And that's what makes people think Trotsky was probably working for the Axis powers. But regardless, after the Second World War, the communist movement is very, very popular. What is the Western system going to do to defeat the communists? Well, the main way they've been fighting the communists is with just straight up anti-communism. Joe McCarthy was very popular, Roman Catholic conservative, hated communism. Communism's a godless ideology, whatever. However, starting in the 1950s, the CIA started hiring Trotskyists to promote anti-communism because they could speak in the name of Marxism. They could speak the communist language, but use it against the Soviet Union. And the CIA launched a program called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And they started Partisan Review magazine in America. They started Encounter magazine in Britain, Paris Review in France, and Der Monat in Germany. And the Frankfurt School emerged in the 1950s as a covertly subsidized wing of communism, a Marxist education place where all these professors are being hired, but they're preaching anti-Sovietism in the name of communism, right? They're saying, well, we're the real Marxists and Stalin is an evil person, and we're the true Marxists, and Stalin is just like Hitler. He's a fascist. And there's a book that they published, the Congress for Cultural Freedom. This is by Theodor Adorno, and it's called The Authoritarian Personality. And you read this book, it basically says that Nazi Germany, it's a study on all these Nazis, like why did all these people become Nazis? And it's paid for by a British think tank called the Tavistock Institute, as well as some Jewish groups in America that are interested in why the Holocaust happened, as well as it's being covertly supported by American intelligence. And they published The Authoritarian Personality. And these Trotskyists that are, working, being covertly funded by the U.S. government and the Congress for Cultural Freedom, they start saying, well, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union are the same system. And it's not rooted in the breakdown of the capitalist system. It's rather rooted in the authoritarian spirit of humanity. Human beings just have this authoritarian impulse, right? There's this, people who form mass movements, who believe in truth. They have the potential to build a Nazi movement, the authoritarian personality. And that becomes a big thing. And it suddenly stops just being an attack on communism. And it starts to be an attack on mass movements entirely. Eric Hoffer writes this book called The True Believer that is widely circulated. Dwight Eisenhower promotes it. And it argues that mass movements of any kind are inherently dangerous, and that people join mass movements because they don't want to admit their own shortcomings, and they just want to blame it on society, and that mass movements are inherently violent and dangerous, and there's this whole shift promoting a new form of anti-communism, saying the Soviet Union is bad, it's just like Nazi Germany, and that it's a result of populism, that deep down people have this authoritarian impulse in their souls, and that's what the Soviet Union and communism comes out of, and that's also what Nazi Germany came out of, and it's very, very dangerous. And this becomes, a new form of anti-communism brought to you by the CIA. So then, what happened? Stalin died in 1953, and 3 years later, the new leader of the Soviet Union is Nikita Khrushchev. And Nikita Khrushchev is looking to make a deal with the United States. He's hoping that he can negotiate some kind of treaty or arrangement with the United States. So when he takes power at the 20th Party Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, he gives what's called the secret speech, which is a tirade against Stalin. He says Stalin is everything that America said he was: a mass murdering dictator, selfish, authoritarian, didn't care about communism, was just in it for himself, trying to advance himself, brutal, crazy, all kinds of crazy things. And it's a pack of lies. And even a lot of Stalin's harshest critics can see that this speech is full of shit. One of the things it says is that Stalin, when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, Stalin was so scared, he just started crying, and he hid under his desk, and he was so scared. That obviously didn't happen. Stalin was a bank robber. He robbed people at gunpoint. He was a bank robber. He walked into banks with a gun and said, "Give me all your money." He'd gotten into shootouts many times. Stalin, he was the man of steel. That's what Stalin literally means. That was his reputation. That was the nickname the other Bolsheviks gave him, the man of steel. The idea that Stalin, just was just hiding and crying under his desk, this was a pack of lies. But this was something that Khrushchev said, and they were trying to denigrate Stalin to the world communist movement, and it was a gesture to the West. Khrushchev was saying Stalin was this radical who was opposing you, but I will accommodate with you. And look, I'm denigrating Stalin, the guy that you hate. And so Khrushchev gave his infamous secret speech in 1956. And that secret speech devastated the global communist movement. All kinds of people, especially in America, many people had gone to jail for being communist. They'd been thrown in prison for being communist. They had, they'd been divorced and lost their marriage for being a communist. They said all these things about the Soviet Union, that it was an evil dictatorship that killed millions of people, and they had said those are lies. And then the leader of the Soviet Union himself had come out and said, oh, it's all true. Stalin is no good. And that was too much. That was just too much for people to handle. And there was just a widespread wave of demoralization that spread. And the global communist movement really started falling apart after Khrushchev's secret speech, because Stalin had been the guy who held the Soviet Union together. However, the secret speech gave a huge boost to the new left. And that these former Trotskyites that are employed by the Congress for Cultural Freedom, Hannah Arendt, Susan Sontag, Irving Kristol, Irving Howe, all these people, they get a boost and they start building up what's called the New Left. And the New Left is a movement that says they're against the Soviet Union, but they're also against Western capitalism, and therefore freedom. Therefore freedom from below. And we know it was the CIA that created the hippie counterculture with Project MK Ultra. They were distributing drugs all over the college campuses, funding abstract art, saying that, socialist art was totalitarian and brainwashing. But abstract art where Jackson Pollock just splatters paint on a canvas, that's what freedom is. And that the new left is created by CIA Trotskyists, basically, as in the wave of demoralization that follows Khrushchev's secret speech. And then China and the Soviet Union break apart and stop supporting each other. And in Hungary, there's an uprising against the Soviet-aligned government, and the Soviet Union sends troops in to crush it. The global communist movement starts, internally being very, very confused because of this. And of course, that gives rise to the New Left, which is an American intelligence project. It's like, how can we be communist but be against the Soviet Union? And the New Left, it's just changing American society, changing U.S. culture in a lot of ways. The New Left is changing American society, but it's also, weakening the global communist movement. So the New Left comes along, right? And the New Left is emerging. And over the course of the Cold War, the CIA figures out that the New Left, not only is it useful in preventing the rise of any communist movement in the Western countries and weakening and isolating the Communist Party of the United States and Britain, all that, but it's actually very good for stirring up unrest within the Soviet Union. And the New Left becomes a vehicle. The CIA starts subsidizing reformists and people that want to overthrow communism in the Eastern Bloc. And George Soros, he brags about it. George Soros paid for art galleries in the USSR for dissident artists and for protest movements in Czechoslovakia and places like that. And that the CIA, they realized that if they were preaching anti-communism, nobody in the communist countries would listen to them. But if they were preaching socialism with a human face, democratic socialism, reform, they're preaching these kind of movements, they can get away with it. And in Czechoslovakia in 1968, a leader of the Communist Party takes power, a guy named Dubček. And Dubček says he's for socialism with a human face. He's not an anti-communist. He just wants to bring in socialism with a human face. But everybody knows, it's been well proven, he was a CIA guy who took power in Czechoslovakia. And the Soviet Union are forced to send their troops to Czechoslovakia to put down what they call the Prague Spring, this uprising engineered in Czechoslovakia by the CIA. And that happens. And of course, Western media plays up. They say, oh, the Prague Spring, the protesters in Czechoslovakia, they're just like the American hippies and counterculture. They just want freedom, man. These are young people with long hair who don't want to fight in a war. And, and it's a very effective propaganda. Whereas the people in America that are opposed to the American government oppose the Soviet government because they think it's crushing the freedom of the hippies and the Prague Spring. This is all very, very effective propaganda. And as the 1970s and 80s continue, the CIA realizes that by framing the opposition to the communist governments not as anti-communism, but rather as socialism with a human face, as Trotskyism, as anarchism, as democratic socialism, they can maneuver within the communist countries and effectively overthrow them. And what happened was you had eventually, 1989, the fall of the Eastern Bloc. And most of the communist governments of the Eastern Bloc fell. And then in 1991, the Soviet Union fell. And at the time that the Soviet Union fell, and at the time that East Germany fell, and Czechoslovakia fell, and Romania fell, most of the people protesting did not want capitalism. They said that, they wanted to keep their guaranteed job and their guaranteed health care, but they wanted to be able to shop at Walmart and have Western consumer goods. They wanted to drink Coca-Cola and wear blue jeans. And on top of that, they also wanted to have more freedom of speech, etc. And they didn't understand that by helping the United States overthrow the communist government, they would lose their free healthcare, they would lose their guaranteed job, and they would bring in economic demolition. And that's what happened. The fall of the Soviet Union was one of the greatest economic disasters in human history. And you can read all about it. Naomi Klein has this great book called The Shock Doctrine. Extreme poverty, 30% unemployment. The suicide rate went through the roof. All kinds of people lost their life savings. The fall of the USSR that Naomi Klein describes in this book, The Shock Doctrine. I mean, the statistics, facts. I mean, it was absolutely devastating when the Soviet system was completely ripped apart. Gorbachev and a lot of the people who helped bring down the Soviet Union believed that America would let the Soviet Union become a welfare state. That was the argument. The Soviet Union would become a welfare state. Well, that's not what happened. They became impoverished countries, and Russia's economy was just ripped apart, right? All the state-run farms, they had the collective farms, they went out of business. The factories closed their doors. 30% unemployment. They started having to import all their food from the United States and import all their food from Western countries. And they weren't making their own steel anymore. And the whole country was just demolished economically. And that was a huge win for Wall Street. It was a huge win. And it was a huge win for the Trotskyites and for the neocons, right? And so out of the Trotskyists that were being backed by the CIA, right? First they were the New Left. Irving Kristol was the head of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, and he was a Trotskyist, and they put him in charge of the CIA program. But starting in the 1970s, there becomes a bit of a schism. Some of the New Left stay leftists, but there's a layer of them, Irving Kristol and others, Max Shachtman, who say, well, Soviet communism is so bad, we're going to support Ronald Reagan. And that in academia at Harvard and Yale and places like that, they start hiring these former Trotskyists to teach what they call Sovietology, which is an academic field focused on the Soviet Union. They obsessively study the Soviet Union. They learn to speak Russian, and they study Lenin's writings, and they study the Soviet Union, and they emphasize it being similar to Nazi Germany. And they discuss how the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany are two examples of what America must oppose. America is on a sacred mission to oppose systems like Nazi Germany and systems like the Soviet Union and to promote freedom. And John Bolton studied Sovietology. And Elliot Abrams studied Sovietology. And Mike Pompeo, they studied Sovietology. And they learned that the Soviet Union was the boogeyman. The Soviet Union was exactly the kind of thing that we're against. But the Soviet Union is an expression of the human spirit. And the big guru for these people, they call them the Neoconservatives. They come out of the New Left and Trotskyism, but they pivot into supporting Republicans and Reagan. The big guru of them is a guy named Leo Strauss. Leo Strauss. And Leo Strauss was a Jewish professor of philosophy who fled Nazi Germany. He moved to New York City and eventually Chicago. And he wrote this book, The Persecution and the Art of Writing. And in this book, he argues that all the great philosophers of history have had to write in code, because if the masses of people knew what they really believed, they would persecute them and oppress them. And that in reality, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, they're just expressions of the brutal authoritarianism within ordinary people. And Leo Strauss emphasizes his belief in what he calls the noble lie, the idea that it's okay to lie because the masses of people, they just can't handle the truth. And his favorite TV show is Gunsmoke. the cowboy Western, where the good guy wears a white hat and he's all good, and the bad guy wears a black hat and he's all bad. And he says that's how average Americans should understand politics. They're not smart enough to really understand the nuances of all of this, right? And so they should instead learn that the world is an episode of Gunsmoke, and that it's okay to lie to people. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, the neocons are riding high because they helped defeat the Soviet Union. And in the 1990s, the neoconservatives, Irving Kristol and Bill Kristol, his son, who starts the Weekly Standard, and all kinds of people, they put together a document called the Project for a New American Century. Project for a New American Century. And it's a think tank, and they publish a manifesto, and it was started in 1997, and it dissolved in 2006. Project for a New American Century, about how can we make sure, how can we make sure that America dominates the world? And it's a very, very eerie piece, the Project for American Century. They publish manifestos and documents. They're neoconservatives, and they publish all kinds of documents. And they say basically that we need some kind of Pearl Harbor, a new Pearl Harbor. Some kind of Pearl Harbor-like event could happen. And with that, we could then we could generate the public support for overthrowing all these various governments in the world that are like the Soviet Union. And they list a number of governments they would like to overthrow: Iraq, Syria, Libya. And they say we need a new American century. We want to overthrow these governments. And they spell it all out, basically. And they say it'll take something like a new Pearl Harbor to do it. And so what happens? 9/11 happens. And after 9/11, the Project for a New American Century goes into effect. And the USA lies to the world and says that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, which they did not have, and invades and overthrows the government of Iraq. And it's a lie. Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. Iraq had nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks, even according to the official story. I mean, it's all bullshit. But it's okay because it's a noble lie, right? The people of the world are just not smart enough, and it's okay to lie to them. And the American government is on a mission to spread freedom around the world. And so, Iraq is overthrown. And what is the result of the Iraqi government being overthrown? The result of the Iraqi government being overthrown is a huge leap in oil prices, right? I remember after the Iraqi government was overthrown, I had said at my school, the USA is invading Iraq for oil. And many people I went to school with said, that's stupid, Caleb. If we invaded Iraq for oil, why are the gas prices so high? Well, that's because we didn't go to Iraq to steal their oil. We blew Iraq off the market so that American oil companies could have dominance. And if you destroy a major oil producing country, that creates scarcity, supply and demand. And so the less oil that's on the market, the higher the price is. And in 2004, 2005, we had the highest oil prices in history, right? $120 a barrel. I mean, it was unbelievable how expensive oil was, the highest gas prices in history. And that was a huge win for American oil companies, but it also backfired. Why? Well, Russia had been economically devastated by the fall of the Soviet Union. But in 1998, they elected a guy named Vladimir Putin to be president. And Vladimir Putin was brought in to stop the Chechen terrorist separatist movement that was trying to tear apart Russia and committing horrendous terrorist attacks. And Vladimir Putin had a plan to restructure Russia's economy around state-controlled oil and gas. And he created two state-controlled mega corporations, Gazprom and Rosneft. And he used the state-controlled oil money to rebuild Russia's economy. Meanwhile, in Venezuela elected a guy in 1998 named Hugo Chavez. And Venezuela has a lot of oil too. And the USA tried to overthrow Hugo Chavez in 2002 with a coup, but the coup failed because the rank-and-file soldiers protected him. And after that, he put oil under public ownership, and he started using oil money to build a socialist movement in Central and South America. the Bolivarian socialist movement and the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are a revolution, an anti-colonial revolution that comes out of, comes out of the post-World War II, right? 1979, they overthrew the Western-backed dictator, the Shah, and Iran all of a sudden has a lot more money coming in because the price of oil is very, very high. And the price of oil is very, very high, and all these anti-imperialist countries, Russia, Venezuela, Iran, they start riding high. Libya is an oil exporting country. Gaddafi becomes the president of the African Union and is talking about building an African bank with the oil money of Libya to sponsor economic development across the African continent. And that the oil price boom that was created by the U.S. invasion of Iraq backfired. And the culmination of it is when Israel invaded Lebanon. Right? Israel invaded Lebanon, and Hezbollah, which is a Shia Muslim revolutionary group in Lebanon inspired by Iran, they kicked Israel's ass. And Israel just got epically defeated by Hezbollah. And the entire Muslim world was cheering for Hezbollah. And Iran was funding Hezbollah with their oil money. And Russia was rising, and Bolivarian socialism was rising, and anti-imperialism was rising, and that's where we get the term the axis of resistance, right? The USA had called Iraq, Iran, and North Korea the axis of evil. Well, Iran and Hezbollah, they start calling themselves the axis of resistance, right? And they say, we're not the axis of evil, we're the axis of resistance. And that the axis of resistance emerges that says we're not going to be dominated by the West. And the BRICS countries emerge. The BRICS countries emerge, and they start, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa start talking about building their own currency. And in Latin America, the Bolivarian alternative of Latin America emerges, and they're creating a bank to fund development all across South and Central America. And that there's a whole new economy that's rising in the world. They thought that the USA had dominance after the fall of the Soviet Union, but it doesn't exist anymore. Russia and China are riding high. Bolivarianism in Latin America, the axis of resistance and Shia Islam in the Middle East, and there's a whole new world is rising. But then what happens? 2008, in the fall of 2008, the U.S. economy epically tanks. The U.S. economy crashes. Wall Street comes crashing down. Why? Why did Wall Street crash in 2008? The housing bubble burst. That's the answer you just. Well, the housing bubble burst. Do you remember that? The housing bubble burst. What did that really mean? What it was that Americans couldn't afford to keep buying homes. The living standards of Americans have been going down. The American people, they used to have good paying industrial jobs, but those jobs are gone. The American people used to have a lot of money. Now the rate of household debt, student debt, credit card debt is through the roof. The American people just can't afford to keep buying houses like they once did. And so Alan Greenspan and the U.S. Congress deregulated the lending of money. And in order to keep Americans buying homes, they're giving people all kinds of mortgage loans that are completely ripoff. They talk about, they get a loan and they pay it for 2 years, and then in the third year their payment triples. And of course you can't pay that, so the home gets foreclosed. And all of this easy credit that had been approved was an attempt to keep the American people spending, because the American people didn't have the money any longer. The American people, their living standards had gone down. They were in debt. Their wages had decreased. The American people couldn't afford to keep buying products and buying housing at the rate that they once did. And all of these fake credit, what mechanisms for keeping the American people spending money they didn't have, it just didn't work anymore. And the economy came crashing down in 2008. Why? Why did this happen? Why were the American people getting poorer? What was behind all of this? Technology. The tendency of the falling rate of profit, the problem of overproduction. The worker can never buy back what he produces, and technology makes this problem worse. I have shown this video before, but this is a problem built into the Western economic system, the system of production organized for profit, right? I'll show you the video, you know, and this is the video where I explain it, and watch and learn.
Explain what needs to be explained, what used to be considered Marxism 101, about why it is that our Western capitalist economy is crashing and burning. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do some math. And I hate math. And you know why I hate math? Because I grew up in America. I went to public school in the United States of America. So I am going to, at risk of embarrassing myself, because math was never my best subject, I am going to do some mathematics here on the board for you to explain the problem.
I very much enjoyed Caleb's speech.
So if you are creating a product, right? If you're a factory owner, you're making a product, you are going to need the material through which that product is made, the manufacturing materials. So that'll be A.
The simple equation you put forward to explain the crisis of overproduction and the falling rate of profit.
And you're probably going to need to transport the product to where it's sold. That's B.
It broke down where your money goes.
You're also going to have to pay your labor costs. Labor costs are represented by C.
Explanations of those concepts that people are able to understand.
Then when consumers purchase the product, they're going to pay a final price. And that final price is D. However, there's a problem with that.
I like the fact that he framed it that way to make it very clear.
Which is that the capitalist can't change how much A costs. He can't change how much B costs. So the profit of the capitalist can only be extracted from the value put into it by the worker. And this is the basis of Marxism, the understanding of surplus value.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere. I've never been able to explain it that simply.
So C, the labor value, is divided. You have C1, which is what the worker actually gets paid. And then you have C2, which is the profit that the capitalist makes. And it all adds up to D, which is the final cost of the product. Now, the way people in the United States who talk about Marxism generally talk about this is they say, well, this is unfair. They say the worker is not getting paid the full value of his labor. But they're missing one of the most important points, which is not just that it's unfair and then people argue, well, what about the employer? He put up the money, doesn't he deserve to be? That's all a distraction. Because the important thing to understand is this. C1 is always going to be less than D. The wages paid out to the worker are never enough to buy back the product that he produces. There is always more products created than there are wages paid out to the worker. And this is the built-in problem of capitalism, the problem of overproduction. And it is always there in the capitalist economy. It never goes away. And they have invented all kinds of crazy mechanisms to try and deal with the problem of overproduction. Part of the reason that the US government has purchased billions and billions of dollars worth of cheese only to bury it in a cave in Springfield, Missouri, is to deal with this problem. It is an ongoing present problem, and it's a problem acknowledged by most capitalist economists. John Maynard Keynes said the problem was underconsumption rather than overproduction, but he was pointing to the same problem. The military-industrial complex in the United States is an effort to deal with this problem, to keep spending going. There's all kinds of mechanisms that they've invented to try and resolve this problem, but it gets worse. What is the capitalist always trying to do? He wants to maximize the amount of profit he makes. And one of the main ways they do that is with what's called labor-saving technology. Get rid of workers and replace workers with machines. As they eliminate workers from the process of production, as there's fewer and fewer workers involved, as machines take the place of workers, the role of C in production decreases. There's a little bit of a problem with that. As C goes down, C2 also goes down, right? As C decreases, C2 also decreases. And as the role of the worker in production is reduced, the rate of profit that the capitalist makes goes down. And this is called the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Only human labor creates value. And this is something that Adam Smith acknowledged. This is something some of the popes even acknowledged. Human labor creates all value. And so when you reduce the role of human labor in production, the amount of value created decreases, and the ability of the capitalist to extract surplus value also decreases. So this causes the capitalist to have to churn out even more products because he's making less and less of a profit on the overall product. He's making less and less of a percentage, so he has to churn them out. So this problem of the worker never being able to buy back what he produces and more products being created than are necessary, this problem becomes exacerbated. And this points to what is understood to be the deeply irrational nature of the capitalist system.
Yes. So the more efficient production becomes and the more technology advances, the more erratic the economy becomes, because there's always never enough wages paid out in the process of production to buy back the products that are being produced. Never. So then when the amount of labor involved goes down, the amount of wages paid out becomes even less. But then the profit that the employer makes is extracted only from the labor power. So the rate of profit they make goes down. So the more efficient production becomes, the more erratic the economy becomes, and the more of an economic meltdown. The capitalist is constantly having to churn out more and more products while the ability of people to buy them is constantly decreasing. And we live in an economic system where there tends to be a huge economic fallout whenever there is a great technological leap. The Great Depression of the 1930s was spurned by the assembly line. That, they had people in factories making products, but during the Great Depression, they got, in the 1920s, before the Great Depression, they got really good at assembly line production. And they made assembly line production as efficient as they possibly could. They called it Taylorism. The Henry Ford developed it. They called it Fordism. And they got so good at assembly line production that the economy crashed, right? That the more efficient production becomes, the better they get at producing products, the fewer workers they have to hire, the more easily replaceable the workers are, the more you have an economic fallout. This is the irrational nature of the capitalist mode of production. And the great technological leap called the computer revolution exacerbated it and made it a bigger problem than ever before. And as a result, Americans can't afford to live anymore. The economy came crashing down. So the economy came crashing down, and living standards in America have been decreasing very significantly ever since then. So that leads to the question of, what do you do about it? And at this point, there is a big division among the American elite about what to do about it. And the rise of Trump and the rise of the new right in Europe is in response to the fact that many of the richest of the rich believe that the way to resolve the economic crisis is with mass destruction of productive forces, mass driving down of living standards and driving down of consumption, and mass depopulation. They say the only way to save the economy of the world is to grind us all into poverty. And that's what they have determined to do. Degrowth. Degrowth is the only way they can save their system. They're basically saying that, human labor power is no longer necessary. There's no room for us at the assembly line. So we've got to create a situation where people live in pods and eat bugs, and they'll own nothing and they'll be happy about it. They're creating a dystopia, a degrowth dystopia to try and save their system, right? And this is what fascism has always been. It has been an attempt to save the economics of capitalism by destroying the productive forces, right? There's even, the Communist Manifesto even refers to this as way back as the Communist Manifesto. I'll put on overproduction. Hold on, let me find it for you, right? I will even put on the screen what Marx said about this, right? About this problem of overproduction and how the capitalist system has to resolve it. Hold on, right? All right. Hold on. Let me just pull up the quote. I always try to assemble all the quotes that I'm going to use, but sometimes, as I'm explaining all of this and getting people to understand what needs to be understood, I realize that there's another thing that I need to say. So hold on, right? Hold on. Right? Crisis that would have been an absurdity. Okay. Oh, here we go. Here we go. All right. Okay. Here, let's put this on the screen so that, so that we can understand exactly what I'm saying about the irrational nature of our economy and why the economy came crashing down and why they need degrowth in order to save it. Hold on. Here we go. All right. Bear with me. Let me just put it on the screen for you all because this is important. So here we go. All right. Hold your horses. Okay. Hold on. All right. Putting it on the screen. Marx overproduction. All right. Okay. Here we go. And I will explain that ultimately the only way you can resolve this and not overthrow capitalism and not move toward a more rational economic system is like this. Okay. It says, a universal famine, a war of devastation has been created. Why? Because there is too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry and commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of bourgeois property. On the contrary, they become too powerful for these conditions by which they are fettered. And soon they overcome these fetters and they bring disorder to all of bourgeois society. And they endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The conditions of society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. So basically, technology advances and we become so good at producing goods and so much wealth is being produced and that there's an abundance of goods, and it creates an economic crisis because our economic system is not able to handle all the wealth that's being created. Human brilliance and creativity has outstripped the restrictions created by the irrational profit system, right? The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. So it goes on. How then does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, by enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces. And on the other, the conquest of new markets, and by the more thorough exploitation of the old ones. That is to say, the paving of the way for more extensive and destructive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. So basically, when we have a crisis of overproduction and when technological leaps create a situation where everyone's hungry and homeless and unemployed because we're so good at creating products, the only way they can get over this is by destroying the productive forces in mass and then seizing new markets and more thoroughly exploiting the current ones, driving down people's wages, forcing people to live in greater poverty, accept lower pay. That's the only way the crisis can be resolved, is by enforcing degrowth. And what is seizing new markets? Seizing new markets is war. And big chunks of the world economy have gotten out from under their domination, right? Russia used to be, in the 90s, it was their captive market. Now Russia is making its own food and Russia is competing with them on the international oil markets. What happened at the beginning of the Russian special military operation? The United States blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, right? This pipeline through which Russia was going to sell natural gas to Germany. Russia, they had this pipeline and the Germans were going to buy their natural gas from them. And the United States blew it up. And now Germany has to buy its natural gas all the way from America. They can't buy it from their neighbor in Russia. They have to buy it from America, seizing new markets, right? That's seizing a new market. The Germans used to be a market for the Russians to buy their natural gas. Well, now America blew up their pipeline. Now they have to buy the natural gas from America, right? Seizing new markets and destroying productive forces, all as a mechanism to save their system. And this really gets to the essence of what is going on. Why is this Ukraine crisis happening? Because the Western economic system is collapsing, and they need new markets for themselves, and they need to drive down living standards very rapidly. They need to save their system. And this gets us back to what Rosa Luxemburg said about World War I, that this World War is a regression into barbarism. and the triumph of imperialism leads to the annihilation of civilization. At first, this happens sporadically for the duration of a modern war, but when the period of unlimited wars begins, it progresses towards inevitable consequences, the triumph of imperialism and the collapse of all civilization. That it would get to the point that this problem of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit would make it so war had to be constant. The system needed constant war in order to keep going. That's where the Western system is at. It is in a state of constant war. That's the root of the Ukraine crisis. And so that's why the United States violently overthrew the Ukrainian government in 2014, installed a fanatically anti-Russian government that started slaughtering the peoples of the eastern regions. This is a monument in Donetsk to all the children killed by the U.S.-backed government. This is why the U.S. government did not honor the Minsk agreement, but set the stage and basically was setting Ukraine up to have a big war with Russia. And that's why Russia got to the point they had to intervene and protect the peoples of the Donbass. And that's why the United States is pouring billions and billions of dollars and sending loads and loads of weapons. They need this war to stay at the top of the world. Their system can't survive without mass destruction and mass war, and big chunks of the world are no longer their captive markets. Through the BRICS, through the Belt and Road Initiative of China, through the Eurasian Economic Union, through the Bolivarian Alternative of Latin America, through the Union of Sahel States in Africa, through the axis of resistance in the Middle East, big chunks of the world are no longer under their domination. So they need to capture new markets. People need to be buying their products again. They desperately need people buying their products, and they desperately need to destroy productive forces, right? This is the essence of the crisis. But it really gets down to the fact that these neocons, these former Trotskyites that are running U.S. foreign policy, they view human beings as just another animal. They think human beings are just another animal, and that man is inherently authoritarian with the authoritarian personality, that human beings are a vulgar mob, they're dangerous, and they need depopulation and degrowth. They need to destroy humanity in order to save their system. They think that there is nothing inherently different between man and animals. They think they can manage human beings like animals, and they are trying to reduce human beings to living biologically. Living biologically. What does that mean, living biologically? Well, think about it. A dog is alive. A cat is alive. The weeds in your garden are alive. Fungi are alive. A rat is alive. All kinds of things are alive. There's a biological definition of life. However, things that are alive biologically are not alive in the truly human sense. Human beings are unlike any other species. We experience life and the ability to be, the ability to live in a way that no other species does. And Friedrich Engels, Marx's close collaborator, observed this directly, and he wrote about it. He wrote an essay about what is it that separates mankind from other animals. And he made a direct observation. He said, all the planned action of animals never succeeded in impressing the stamp of their will upon the earth. That was left for man. In short, the animal merely uses its environment and brings about changes in it simply by its presence. Man, by his changes, makes it serve his ends, and he masters it. And this is the final and essential distinction between man and other animals. And once again, it is labor that brings about this distinction. Man exercises agency. He stamps his will upon the world. Man says, I want to do this. And he forces the world to correspond with his vision. Animals respond to pain. They avoid pain, and they seek pleasure. Right? And they will avoid pain. They will seek pleasure. They will respond to stimuli, but they don't exercise agency, and they don't look at the world around them and say, I want it to be different. They do not stamp their will upon the earth. But man stamps his will upon the earth. That is what defines human beings. They stamp their will upon the earth. They master their environment, and they do it with their labor. We force the world to serve us. And our ruling elite don't understand this. They view man as just another animal. They view man as just another animal, and they want to reduce us. They want to control us. They've studied extensively how to manipulate and control us, and they have a vision of reducing us to be rats in their maze, reducing us to living biologically, to owning nothing and eating bugs and being happy about it and living in pods. They have a vision for reducing humanity toward living biologically, and they don't understand the essence of what it means to be human. Human beings can transcend mere biological existence. We have a connection to something higher. We have the ability to interact with our environment, to force our will upon the earth, and to define ourselves and to change the world. And that's what human beings have always done. And if you look at 8,000 years of human existence, we've been constantly reinventing our relationship with nature, constantly stamping our will upon the environment more effectively. We have extremely expanded our life expectancy, extremely expanded our population. Human beings have an ability to reinvent their relationship with nature, to force nature to serve them, and to move toward a higher plane of existence that no other species can come close to. Right? Human beings have the ability to not simply live in the biological sense, but to live in a spiritual sense. Human beings have the ability to be, to say, I am. And this is really what defines God, right? And this is where I might lose some people, and I don't care, right? But I'm telling you, I want to revisit, right? The Abrahamic faiths, right? Christianity, Islam, Judaism. One figure who shows up in the Abrahamic faiths is a guy named Moses. You ever heard of Moses? Moses is a very, very important figure in the Abrahamic tradition. And Moses, the story goes, lived in Egypt, and his people, the Jews, were oppressed in Egypt, and he sought to free them. Now, many people say that it probably was not actually Egypt. It's probably some other country, because there's no record of Moses and the Jews being slaves in Egypt. So it's not clear. But regardless, the scripture, the story that's been passed on for thousands of years, tells the story that Moses was out in the desert praying, and something came upon him. A burning bush came upon him and told him that he could free his people from their oppression. And this voice from a burning bush said to him, "Thou mayest bring forth my people and the children of Israel out of Egypt." And Moses said unto God, "Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt?" And he said, "Certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be token unto thee, that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain." So he's being told that this voice, this God, will be with him, and that he has the ability to exercise his willpower to liberate his people. Who am I that I should do this? Well, I will be with you. God says, I will be with you to make this happen. So then, what is the next part of the story of the burning bush? Moses has this vision. This burning bush is burning before him, and this voice comes out of him and says, "You can free your people from oppression." And so then Moses said, "Behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, God of your fathers hath sent me unto you, and they say to me, What is his name? What shall I say unto them? And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou unto the children say, I am hath sent me unto you. So God is giving Moses permission to be. He's saying you can assert your willpower. You can stamp your will upon the world. You can free your people from bondage and oppression. You can actively take agency. You can force the world around you to be recreated as you would desire it. You don't have to accept conditions of bondage. That I will be with you, I, God, shall be with you. And God's name, what is God's name? What is the God that is giving me permission, giving me the power to free my people? He says, I am that I am. Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. So God is telling him that the very nature of God is existence. God is being. God is existing. God is saying, I am. God is asserting your humanness and refusing to take on a biological existence. God and the connection with God is what separates human beings from animals. God is I am. God is I am. God is being. Right? This is very, very important. And this comes up later, right? And, thousands of years later, in Israel, in the Temple of Jerusalem, there exists Jesus. And Jesus is really, really angry at the Jewish scholars. And he has a very intense argument with the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin and the Jewish teachers in the temple. And he vehemently disagrees with them. And if you go and read the Bible, go read John chapter 8, and you will read an argument that goes on for pages and pages between Jesus Christ and the religious authorities of his day. And I will read to you how the argument ends. The argument ends this way. And Jesus answered, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father that I honoreth me, for whom ye say that he is your God. Ye have not known him, but I know him. And if I should say I know him not, I shall be a liar unto you. But I know him, and I keep his saying. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it, and he was glad. And then said the Jews unto him, thou art not yet 50 years old, and hast thou seen Abraham? And Jesus said unto them, verily I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. I am. And they then took up stones to cast at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and passed by. They were so angry that he would say that. But he says, I am connected to something higher. I am connected to God. I am connected to my Father. And if I were to tell you I wasn't connected to a higher power, if I was to tell you that I wasn't connected to my Father in heaven, I would be lying. And your father Abraham rejoiced at the day that I existed. And they say, how do you know Abraham? And he says, before Abraham was, I am. Right? The essence of God is being. The essence of God is asserting a non-biological existence. Human beings are not simply animals. They're not simply rats in a maze. They have the ability, as Frederick Engels said, to stamp their will upon the earth. And that is why we are constantly inventing new technology and rising to a higher plane. We are not simply another animal. We have the ability to recreate the world in our own image. And that is a godlike ability. And that is what separates us from animals. There is a war going on in the world today. And Ukraine, the special military operation, is just one battle in this much bigger war that is taking place. And it is a war between forces who believe that mankind is only another animal, that believe mankind has only a biological existence, forces that believe that there is no soul and that human beings are just another animal. This is called philosophical irrationalism. The belief that human beings, the masses of people, are the enemy. Human beings are a cancer upon this earth, that human beings are undesirable creatures, that human beings are no good. This is called philosophical irrationalism. Friedrich Nietzsche put forward this notion, the idea that there is no real truth, there is no reality, and that any attempt to say that the world has reason and rationality, any attempt to say that there is real truth is totalitarianism, and it is a way that the Ubermensch, the great individual who defines his own reality, is oppressed, right? That there is no truth, there is no reality, and that attempts to bring order and meaning to the universe are simply totalitarian. It's the vulgar mob, the Untermenschen, the last man trying to hold back the great ones. But the great ones are those who assert their will onto the world, assert their will by saying there is no truth and there is no reality, and that mankind is just another animal, right? This philosophical irrationalist view, first put forward by Friedrich Nietzsche, but later echoed by Ayn Rand, later echoed by Leo Strauss, the founder of neoconservatism. They hate the masses of people. They view the human beings as a vulgar mob that is very dangerous and needs to be contained. And they are very threatened by the Soviet Union, and they are very threatened by what emerged, that system that emerged breaking out of colonialism, the anti-colonial world that emerged as a result of the Russian Revolution, as a result of the defeat of Trotsky. They are very, very opposed to humanity asserting itself. And they want to grind back the wheels of history. They want depopulation. They want to drive down living standards. They want to secure their system, and they want to restrain humanity. And humanity is in revolt against philosophical irrationalism and against the neoconservatives and against the British Empire and against the dying economic order that they represent, the economic system where technological progress leads to greater economic instability, right? The weight of technological progress and the ability of humanity to reinvent its relationship with nature has outstripped the narrow limits and restrictions of their system. And so they are desperately trying to beat humanity back down into a biological existence and contain humanity to keep themselves at the top. But humanity and its ability to strive to a higher plane is reasserting itself and saying, we have the right to be. We have the right to be. We have the right to assert our will onto the world. We can build high-speed railway. We can lift our people out of poverty. We can build bridges and highways. We can lift ourselves up. And the old dying Western system is trying to destroy humanity and trying to push humanity back into the narrow limits that they can contain. They're trying to reduce humanity to a biological existence, whereas humanity is refusing to be caved and caged, right? And this is the fight that is taking place. This is the sacred war that is taking place. Russia and China and Iran and Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua and Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso and Yemen and so many corners of the world have asserted their existence. They have done like Moses, and they have said, I am. And with God with them, they are asserting their independence from oppression and asserting their right to be and their ability to reinvent the world and to build themselves up and to grow. And the Western system is trying to stop growth so that they can stay at the top and so that they can maintain their irrational economic system that cannot handle human progress, right? This is a crisis of overproduction in the Marxist sense. This is the death agony of an irrational system where production is organized for profit. And there are a number of states, governments that have come out of anti-colonial struggles, right, and have asserted the needs of a nation and taken rational control of the means of production and started building up their people, building up their country, and with rational planning have been enabling their people to live and become stronger. And that's what the Western system cannot handle. And that is the fight that is going on. It is a fight between living biologically and the oligarchical view of mankind, Malthusianism and philosophical irrationalism, battling against I am, battling against being, battling against the human will to drive for something better, the human will to build and construct and reinvent the world and stamp our will upon the earth. This is a battle of humanity against a dying irrational system that humanity has long outmoded and transcended. That is the fight taking place around the world today. It is a fight between the dying old order and its anti-human perspective and its need to destroy productive forces and beat down humanity versus the anti-colonial revolutions around the world and the people of the world all asserting their will to build and construct and raise themselves up. That is the fight that is taking place in the world today. And that is what is behind the Ukraine hoax. That's why they lied and said that Russia interfered in our elections to get Donald Trump elected and prevented Trump from improving U.S.-Russia relations when he first got elected. That's why they lied and covered up the Hunter Biden laptop and said that, the Hunter Biden laptop story, that's just Russian propaganda when it was actually true. That's why they were able to set the stage and provoke this situation where Russia had no choice but to protect the peoples of the eastern regions. These people who've been dying ever since the USA violently overthrew the Ukrainian government in 2014 and installed this fanatically anti-Russian government that's been killing people. It's the neocons and the Trotskyites with their anti-human perspective and their desire for destruction that has been weaponized by the dying Western colonial order, hijacking the aesthetic of destruction that comes out of leftism and weaponizing it against the new world that came into being as a result of the anti-colonial revolutions. That's what the Ukraine hoax is about. And I look at what Paula Luna is doing and how she's going over to Russia. And I look at the prosecution of James Comey and the fact that the FBI raided the home of John Bolton, the fact that Donald Trump may soon be meeting with Kim Jong-un again, and I believe the Ukraine hoax is coming to an end. But we shall see. It is a daily battle. And my hat is off to everyone who plans to go and disrupt the No Kings rallies that are taking place across the country. The Democrat Party, the clown party, the party of liberal frauds, the party of war against Russia, the party of regime change operations is having a series of stupid rallies against Donald Trump. But we at the Center for Political Innovation have put out a call for people all across this country to go to those rallies and say, hands off Venezuela, and disrupt these rallies, demanding that the threats against Venezuela, a country that is broken free, and to bring a message of hands off Venezuela to the No Kings rallies that are taking place across the country. That is the call that we have put out. And that call is catching on like wildfire. And people are already planning to do it in various parts of the country, figuring out how to do it strategically. We are going to stamp our will. We are going to say we will not live in a country that has a war against Venezuela and sends Americans to die in a war to destroy Venezuela, a country that has asserted its economic independence. And we are asserting our ability to be. We are saying that we will be. We will be. We will stamp our will upon the world, and we will say no to this war. We will not allow this war to go forward. We will not allow the Trump administration, the Biden administration, the Democrat Party, the Republican Party to launch a new war in South America. We will not allow it. This war will not pass, and we will assert our will onto history. We're not just going to sit back and watch a podcast. We're not just going to sit back and say, oh, this is fun. I can feel like I'm smart on the internet. No, we are saying, I am. We will be. We will assert our ability. We will assert our will onto history and say we will not allow this war to happen. And we are going to go to the No Kings rallies, and we are going to make a ruckus, and we are going to assert an anti-war message, a message of opposition to the destructive war that they're plotting while they want us to get caught up in their stupid red team versus blue team fights. We are going to assert our will. We are going to be human. That is how we will intervene on the crisis. That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. And that's what this war in Ukraine is about. And that's what the Ukraine hoax is about. And that's why the neocons perpetrated this neocon hoax, this Ukraine hoax. That's why John Bolton and James Clapper and Obama and Newland and Hillary Clinton lied to us about Russian meddling in the elections. That's what the Ukraine hoax is about. It is a noble lie from the neocons, from Leo Strauss, from Irving Kristol, motivated by their anti-human perspective. And humanity is rejecting the Ukraine hoax, just like it's rejecting their plans for a new high-tech dark ages. And those are my opening remarks for tonight. So now we'll do the roll call, and then I will answer people's questions for the remainder of the night. Names and locations, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations. We got Penny from Minnesota. We just had a great reading group in Minnesota. I can't wait to hear how it went. They just did a great reading group. Penny did a great rally that was happening, to oppose U.S. involvement in Ukraine. We got David Fox in Bendigo, Australia. Good stuff, good stuff. Zach in Pennsylvania. We got Gabby in Chicago. We got Rose battling the transhumanists. We got Jenny in Cincinnati. Names and locations, names and locations. We got John in Florida. Names and locations, names and locations. We got another John in Florida who went to 5 colleges. We got David in Hamilton, Ontario. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Good evening from Kakalaki. That's slang for North or South Carolina. We got Peter in Oregon. We got Alex in Brazil. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. We got Ron McKinnon in New York City. We got Matteo in Italy. Names and locations, names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Mumbenzi from the city. All right. Good to see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. JT from Smashville. Patricia from Toronto, Ontario. St. David's, Bermuda. Good to have you with us. Good to have you with us. Jerry from Ireland. Condemning creation in effect. Very, very good. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations, names and locations. Names and locations. You all are an awesome, awesome group of people. I love you all. I really, really do. I really, really do love you all. I hope that people will take this seriously, our call for intervening at the No Kings rallies on Saturday and raising the message of hands off Venezuela. I really hope that you will take this seriously. You can do it. People are already making their signs. People are already making their plans for interventions, right? Disrupt the rally, make a scene for hands off Venezuela. It's urgent that you do it. Don't break the law. Don't do anything illegal, right? Just make a scene. Make a scene. Make some noise. Make it so these rallies don't proceed as usual. They have an interruption from people. Bring a bullhorn, bring some signs, and make a scene opposing war in Venezuela. Opposing war in Venezuela. Bring an actual demand to the circus of No Kings. That is our call. Hands off Venezuela interventions at the No Kings rallies. All right. Now you can send questions 3 ways. 3 ways that you can send questions. You can send them as Rumble rants on the Rumble. You can send them as Cash App. You can Cash App them, Caleb Maupin 22. But the best way, the absolute best way, is buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee is amazing. You just ask your question, you buy me a coffee. So buy me a coffee, ask me a question. And I'm going to start answering people's questions for the second half of the show now. So yeah, send some questions, get me talking, and I will answer people's questions here for the second half of the show. The first question I received was from African Fan. He said, "Thanks for the good work. What do you think of the revolutionary communists of the UK? I tend to appreciate their young and interesting team." The Revolutionary Communist International, RCI, right? In Britain, they're called the Revolutionary Communist Party of the UK. In America, they're called the Revolutionary Communists of America. They are a rebrand of the International Marxist Tendency, which is a Trotskyite group. The followers of, what's his name? Alan Woods and Ted Grant. They are mainline Trotskyites, but they rebranded recently, and they've gotten a huge amount of publicity. And they're not anti-imperialist. They don't support Russia and Ukraine. They don't support China. They don't support any of the countries. But they make a really big point of just going around with red flags and hammers and sickles and being the scare porn of conservatives. I honestly believe that RCA very well could be some kind of psychological operation. My fear is that, in order to get the USA to have a war with Venezuela or with China, the public needs to be psyched up for it. And we know what happened on January 6th. In America, January 6th is a lot of Trump supporters were brought to Washington, D.C. for a rally because they thought the election was stolen. And it was. It turns out the Hunter Biden laptop story was legit. And the way that they suppressed it and kept it out of the mainstream media was by calling it propaganda. So the 2020 election was stolen. It wasn't stolen exactly in the way that a lot of Trumpers thought it was, but it was stolen. And a lot of Trumpers were brought to Washington, D.C., and there were FBI informants, over 200 FBI agents among the crowd, and they arranged for them to get into the U.S. Capitol building and run around like fools, and they created hysteria around that event to justify the mass political repression of Trump supporters, etc. And my fear is that RCA, I think they're just a group of trots, but they are getting boosted in a very unhealthy way. And they don't really have a very coherent message. It's just kind of like, we're communists. We hate the Soviet Union. We hate Stalin. We hate all the communist countries, but we're communists. Woo, yay, revolution. They love Trotsky. They love themselves some Trotsky. My fear, and the fact that Vivek Ramaswamy bought one of their newspapers and did a whole big thing promoting them, and that they've been promoted in mainstream media like crazy. My fear and my concern is that they are going to be used for some kind of false flag. Look, we all know about Patriot Front, right? There's this group called Patriot Front in America, right? And they're a neo-Nazi organization, but no one knows where they came from. But they just kind of show up, right? They just kind of show up in masks and have these like scary Nazi rallies, right? That all the mainstream media knows about ahead of time and shows on TV to scare people. I believe that RCA is the communist version of Patriot Front. It is a psyop. It is created as scare porn for conservatives. The conservatives, Charlie Kirk's killing and his death, they're psyching up the conservatives. Communists did this. This was done by communists. It wasn't done by communists, right? It was done by, according to the official story, it was done by some guy who was formerly a Trump supporter and fell in love with a transgender person and did it all on his own. A lot of people doubt the official story. Where's the exit wound? Where's the blood? Something's not right. But regardless, that's the official story. It was done by communists. Well, it wasn't done by communists, right? Even according to their official story. But yet they're psyching up conservatives. It's communists. It's communists. And so you have RCA that comes out of nowhere and gets boosted in mainstream media. And all they do is, look at us. We're communists. We're communists. And they're not teaching anybody anything. Show me one example of RCA teaching people about imperialism, monopolistic capitalism, teaching them about overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profits. Their analysis basically announced to workers and employers, it's unequal and that's no fair. So we need to have a bloody, violent revolution so the workers take over. Yeah. And Stalin wasn't a real communist because all the bad stuff I read about him and learned in school. So yeah, but we need a workers' revolution. There's no politics whatsoever. It's just this little, and look at us. We have a big, scary hammer and sickle. We're scary and we hate Trump and we're communists. There's no politics going on. I believe it is a psyop. And I believe that it's very possible that in order to justify some kind of military intervention, they'll create some kind of false flag where one of these groups that they're boosting that does no education whatsoever, right? You just heard me talk for 2 hours about overproduction, about imperialism, philosophical irrationalism. Show me any of their material that comes even close to this, that explains any of these concepts. They don't because they don't really believe it, right? It's just kind of LARPing. They're out there. Look at us. We're communists. And I believe the government is boosting them because they won't teach anybody anything and possibly to use them as a false flag. So no, I'm not a big fan. And, to call yourself a communist is very cheap nowadays. the overwhelming majority of people who call themselves communists in America don't support Russia and Ukraine, don't support China, don't support Venezuela, don't support Iran. So, they call themselves communists. Whoop-de-doo. I don't care, right? I don't call myself a communist anymore. I'm an innovationist, right? Leftism has been reduced to an aesthetic, right? It's been reduced to the red flag, guillotine necklaces, hammers and sickles, and it's a useless aesthetic, right? That most of the anti-imperialist governments, most of the new economy in the world has moved away from. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of RCA. Not a big fan. Okay. Next question. John in Idaho says, why, right? Why, hold on. Why did European powers and the U.S. ever try to stop Russia from pulling out of World War I to help their fight and prolong the war? Of course they did. Of course they did, right? I mean, after the Tsar was brought down, you had the provisional government of Alexander Kerensky that was supported by the West, and he continued fighting in World War I. And part of the reason the Tsar was brought down was because many people viewed the Tsar as incompetent. They viewed the Tsar as incompetent, as losing the war. And a lot of the forces that brought down the Tsar wanted to continue fighting the war, and they felt the Tsar was getting in the way of that. And there was the Kornilov reaction, and there was all kinds of funding and support for forces that wanted to keep Russia in the war. Yeah. I mean, of course they did. I mean, the other thing that gets thrown out, I'll just address this, is that, people that think the Russian Revolution was a Wall Street conspiracy always point to a guy named Jacob Schiff. Right? And they always say, aha, Jacob Schiff. Well, there was a Wall Street banker named Jacob Schiff who was a big funder of the World Zionist Organization, and he hated the Tsar because the Tsar was anti-Semitic, because the pogroms that there was a lot of oppression of Jews in Russia. He funded various people in Russia that were against the Tsar, but he supported World War I, and he was funding all kinds of groups, like the Russian Freedom Group was one of his groups, etc. And he supported a lot of people in Russia. There is absolutely no evidence that he supported the Bolsheviks. But because he supported people in Russia that were against the Tsar, they say, oh, see, the Russian Revolution was a big plot by Jews. It was a big plot by Wall Street. That does not compute. And in fact, the Jacob Schiff Center, which was paid for by his estate, which was a huge synagogue in the Bronx, was very anti-communist during the 1930s. And Jacob Schiff was a funder of the World Zionist Organization. And the World Zionist Organization was against the Soviet Union and tried to move Jews out of Russia as quickly as it possibly could. But that's a really, 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 really common lie, is this claim that Jacob Schiff was responsible for the Bolsheviks taking power. Right? There is no proof he ever funded the Bolsheviks. He just funded anti-Tsarist forces. Right? And the anti-Tsarist forces that he supported also wanted to continue Russia's involvement in World War I. And the Kerensky government was continuing World War I. The reason the Bolsheviks took power is that they opposed involvement in World War I. That was their defining position. They were the anti-war party, peace, land, and bread. And, and they wanted to end involvement in World War I, and nobody else did. And they were the main force that said, if you bring us to power, we will end involvement in World War I, So there you go. So, yeah. There you go. Yeah. I don't have time for people being fools. So, right. So yeah. So anyhow, yeah, the idea that the Bolsheviks were a plot by Jacob Schiff is not actually true. Right? It's not actually true. And Jacob Schiff was against the Tsar, but he also was for World War I. And I see that, there's a couple of these Fuentes fans in the chat who are just losing it. And it's like, that's their response, right? They don't have any arguments in response. They just have insults. Nick Fuentes is a cancer. He really is. He's training people to be stupid. I mean, it's like, I've proved many, many times that Jacob Schiff, and the idea that the Russian Revolution was a conspiracy by Jacob Schiff is not accurate, right? Jacob Schiff was against the Tsar, but he wasn't pro-Bolshevik, right? And he was pro World War I. He supported World War I. Why would he want the Bolsheviks to take power? And he funded the World Zionist Organization. I proved this so many times, and but people just want to believe it, right? And so, and that doesn't mean, anyway. All right, next question. Unanimous says, a lot of people say economic liberalization is how Russia, China, and India got rich. Is this true? Well, I don't know enough about India, but I can speak to Russia and China. Now, in Russia's case, the liberalization in the 90s economically devastated them. I mean, their economy in the 90s was an absolute disaster. They were privatizing things, selling them off to the highest bidder, and people were dying en masse. And things only got better when Putin reasserted state control by putting oil and gas under public ownership, creating two giant state-controlled mega corporations. That he then used those giant state-controlled mega corporations to bring in energy revenue, and they used the distribution of energy revenue to rebuild Russian industries. And so, yeah, liberalization is not what made Russia's economy stronger. It was reassertion of state control. Now, China is a little bit of a different story. China, they had been cut off by the Soviet Union. They were isolated, and they did have market reforms. But the idea that China proves that we should have free market capitalism is absurd, right? China has 5-year economic plans. China has state-run banks. China has about 50% state ownership in their economy. In 2015, China's stock market crashed and nothing happened because most of their economy is completely insulated from the stock market. Most of their economy is centered around the state, right? When the US government shuts down, like it is right now, in China, they covered in the news extensively because if the Chinese government shut down, China would fall apart because most of their economy is centered around the state. China has a lot of private corporations, but even the private corporations have no rights. They are forced to do what the government tells them to do and cooperate with the 5-year plans. But yes, they do have a stock market. They do have private corporations. Now, the idea that China, which, yes, in the 70s, they did have liberalization, late 70s, early 80s, and they needed to have liberalization. But the idea that proves that we should therefore have free market capitalism is a complete logical fallacy. It would be like saying, you know what, it was cold in my bedroom last night, and so I turned the heater on. I adjusted, I turned the heater on, and then it got more comfortable. So therefore, I should light my bedroom on fire because that proves that more heat is always the answer, right? That's ridiculous. China has a huge amount of state ownership, but they tweaked, they adjusted to have some liberalization, and yeah, it benefited them. Right. But the idea that China benefiting from having market reforms proves that we should privatize everything and have like a totally libertarian economy is absolutely ridiculous. Russia, on the other hand, in the 90s, they did have a very libertarian economy. They completely gutted and looted the state sector, and it was a disaster. They reasserted state control in the 90s. India, I don't know that much about their economic policies. I do know that in the 60s and 70s, India had a government that was not Marxist, but was kind of nationalistic, right? And that the Congress Party of India was aligned with the Soviet Union, and that they did have a lot of nationalizations, et cetera, but that India remained a very poor country. I mean, they never had a full socialist economy. I do know that in the 90s, they did have liberalization. And I do know also that they have really benefited from trade with Russia and trade with China. It's complicated. I don't know enough about India to speak to it, but in the case of Russia, it's definitely not true. In the case of China, yes, liberalization was needed, but it's not free markets. China's not a free market country. And that's one thing that's infuriating, right? Whenever you argue with about economics with any of these people, right, they say nowhere has communism ever been successful. And then if you say China, they say, oh, but China's capitalist. And it's like, really? China's capitalist, right? Obamacare is communism. Right. The post office is communism, but China, where the government owns 50% of the economy, where there's a Marxist Leninist party in power, where the government has banks, where they have 5-year plans, that's capitalism. Oh, okay. Right. And the only reason they say that is because it's convenient. China is not a free market country. The amount of state control and state planning in China is massive, but it's not what it was in the 70s. It's not the Soviet Union. It's not the Soviet model. And it shouldn't be. I believe you need a market economy like Vietnam. They're socialist-oriented market economy, like, like Venezuela, where the government controls the oil, but it uses oil money to stabilize and build up industries. You need a private sector in the economy. I'm not opposed to the market. I think the market is a necessary part of 21st century socialism. I do, but there are many countries that liberalized, you could say, without ever having a socialist foundation, right? And in the 90s, Latin America also adopted crazy free market policies, and it was a disaster. I went to Ecuador in 1999 when they had been forced to sell off their economy to the highest bidder, privatize their oil industry, adopt the U.S. dollar as their currency. And in Ecuador in 1999, I saw a man-made famine created by market liberalization. Bolivia sold off its water resources to the highest bidder. Throughout the 1990s, Latin America was devastated by liberalization. So, China maintaining their socialist planned economy, but adopting market mechanisms. Yeah, I'd say that is responsible for a lot of their success, and rightly so. Russia certainly suffered dramatic suffering when they had liberalization, and they fixed it by reasserting state control. India, I don't know enough to say specifically about it. So that's my answer to the question. So yeah, there's a lot of trolls in here tonight, and that's good because that shows that people are paying attention to us, right? The fact that we're getting trolls is a sign that we're worth paying attention to. So, all right, next question. I believe those are all the coffees that have been bought. So, I do want to answer other questions, but buy me a coffee is the best way, the absolute best way to send a question. But we do have some Rumble rants that have come in, and I will answer those Rumble rants. But yeah, if folks want to buy me a coffee, that's the best way to send a question. So, questions can be sent as Rumble rants, Caleb Moppin 22, Cash App, but the best way is buy me a coffee. I am going to put on some music. I'm going to put on some music. I think I'll put on the song that people really like, the New China song that people really like. I'm going to put that on. And after that, I will answer any more questions. So send questions via Buy Me a Coffee. Send questions. You can send Rumble rants also. Cash App, Caleb Moppin 22. But send your questions. I'll answer them. And after I'm done answering questions, we'll call it a night.
Got to the border, we began to walk under two flags flying over the bridge we were to cross. One was the bloody British rag of imperialism, casting its shadow over poverty, starvation, vicious exploitation in Hong Kong. The other was the flaming red flag of revolution and socialism, telling us all, the people of the world, the time has come to come along. This ain't just any old border that we are standing on. It stands between two systems, one dying, one young and strong. And then we crossed that bridge into China, saw a great banner up ahead. Its meaning set my heart a pounding, and this is what that banner is. Long live the great unity of the peoples of the world. Long live the great unity of the peoples of the world. Went to a steel mill, saw people working hard, but there were no bosses. The workers ran the job. They worked 10 hours, 6 days a week, on great machines built by their own hand. They labored not for some rich man's profits, but to meet the needs of people of the land. And they are building with such a spirit of revolution and socialism, for they are masters of their own future. The working class is in command. Talked with an older worker. He said many worries are gone. If one is sick or injured, they are provided for. We have no fear of rising prices, no unemployment will you find. There's always more to be done to build China, not just for us but to free mankind. Long live the People's Republic, long live working class rule. Long live the People's Republic, long live working class rule. We arrived in Shanghai, where before it was free. Dope and prostitution and starving people filled the streets. And now these people stand up united, providing for the needs of all. Decent housing, health care, education, they decide now they are the law. And man, I felt so damn proud of China, of revolution and socialism. Just look at what our class has accomplished. Just look at what the struggle has won. We talked with men and women, now working side by side, about our many struggles for freedom so long denied. They said, comrades, China is with you. This is your country as well as ours. The struggles of the people united will be triumphant. We have the power. Long live the great unity, yeah, of the peoples of the world. Long live the great unity, yeah, of the peoples of the world. You know, I missed my family, wish they were there with me. I knew they're back home struggling to change society. And I admit I hated to leave China. You know that freedom kinda grows on you. But now I feel such deep determination to do the job we all have to do. Remember, people, our day is coming. Make revolution, build socialism, to do away with class exploitation, to end oppression once and for all. And I have learned a lesson that I will always heed. The fight to end oppression, the working class must lead. For we will build us up a great movement to sweep away the system we're in. And nothing gonna stop us from doing it. We will fight and we will win. Long live the People's Republic, long live working class rule. Long live the People's Republic, long live working class rule.
All right, everybody. Glad to be back. Yeah, so if you got a question, send it as a Rumble rant or you can Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22, or you can buy me a coffee. Somebody in the chat was saying, how can I donate? Well, you can Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22, or you can buy me a coffee, and you don't have to send a question. You can just send money if you want. I mean, it's fine if you want to help me out. I'm not opposed. But yeah, you can go to the CPI website, hit donate, right? So yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I'm going to start answering people's questions. If more questions come in, I'll answer them. But yeah, Rumble Rants. Penny says 1,200 international investors came to invest in Burkina Faso Forum. Traore presented a vision for energy industrial development and praised hardworking Burkina Faso workers. Yeah, Ibrahim Traore is building, right? Penny has a great book that she wrote about Ibrahim Traore and about the great, work that he's doing. We published this book that Penny wrote about Ibrahim Traore. And where's my copy of it? My copy of it's around here somewhere. I was going to hold up the book and I don't know where I put it. But, we love Ibrahim Traore. We really, really do. Ibrahim Traore is kind of a great example of an anti-imperialist, anti-monopoly government. We find what he does and the work he's doing in Burkina Faso to be very, very amazing. And courting international investment, right? Again, we're not opposed to international investment, right? We believe you need a government of action that fights for working families. Penny says the Union of Sahel States and Togo are modernizing and harmonizing their customs information systems to streamline trade and access security. Togo gives AES better sea access and more efficient port than Kenya. Again, it's all about development. It's all about building, raising people up from poverty, right? That's the whole point, right? Breaking out of the biological existence, stamping our will upon the environment. That is the essence of what it means to be human. And that's the battle, right? It is the battle for I am, right? That is taking place in the world today between philosophical irrationalism and those who view mankind as just an animal and are trying to destroy the productive forces in order to save their system, and the inherent humanness and will to survive of mankind. So there we go. Dugan says he thinks Trump and Putin will ally together to lead strong Christian powers to fight the liberal establishment. It was an interview with CNN. Well, Dugan says a lot of things. I've met Dugan. I'm very proud of the fact that I had the opportunity to speak on a panel with Dugan back in 2018. Right. I think Dugan has a lot of good insights about liberalism, etc. But I don't agree with everything he says. Right. Is it possible that Trump and Putin will become allies? That would be awesome. I don't, it doesn't look that way. It would be nice if they could sign a peace treaty and stop, having, if Trump could stop funding this war in Ukraine and we could have trade and peace with Russia, that would be a great step in the right direction. But, we actually became allies with Russia. That would be great. I don't see it as happening on the basis of conservatism. It'd probably be happening on the basis of economics. But that's interesting. I will say I met Dugan in 2018. 2018, I met Dugan and I got canceled for it. I got my reputation destroyed and all of that, right? Before anyone ever met with Dugan, any of these internet grifters, before they met with Dugan to prove how based they are, I got my reputation destroyed for it because I'm real, right? And other people are frauds. Other people are plants. That's why they get boosted by Israel. Yeah, folks, if Israel tweets out an April Fool's joke about somebody, they're a plant, okay? And the fact that people can't see that, that's on you. But, I met with Dugan in 2018 because he's a very important anti-imperialist intellectual. And I was very proud to speak with him. I love his book, The Fourth Political Theory. I learned a lot from it. But on some points, we disagree. I believe in historical progress. He does not. We disagree on some things. But I think he's a really, really important anti-imperialist. And I take his ideas seriously. And, stuff that he says about a lot of things like North Korea and other things is very insightful. He's an anti-imperialist and he understands how people around the world that are opposing imperialism, but, how the global anti-imperialist movement that is rejecting Western liberalism, how they think, right? And what the the world that is rejecting the Western system, how they see things, which is a mixture of left and right. He understands geopolitics, Eurasia versus the Atlanticist system. I draw heavily from Dugin, and I respect Dugin, but at the same time, we don't agree on everything. And, I don't know what to say. But, when I met with him, it was, I became a target, and all the communist groups turned against me, said I'm a Nazi. I had my reputation destroyed for it. And other people met with Dugin, and for some reason, the algorithms were rigged. So that was based. That was cool. And if you don't realize that these other people are frauds and fakes, and that I am a genuine person, I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, I mean, just throwing that out there, right? If you're one of these people that thinks that these people who somehow managed to meet with Dugin and not have their reputation destroyed for it and get advertisement for it and get boosted for it, if you think those people are sincere, ask yourself why they don't want to get along with me. Why have they gone out of their way to antagonize me and the CPI community, right? If they were sincere and wanted to carry out real action for what they supposedly believe in, they would want to get along with me. They don't. Right. And they basically, they saw what I did and what I've done, and they've basically created a version of me that is safe, right? A version of me that is safe, that they don't engage in any activism. They don't do any real organizing. They just, they just talk shit on the internet. And they're doing some dude bro streamer thing. And it's a way to prevent people from getting involved in our organization. We're doing something real, right? We're headed to the No Kings rallies on Saturday to bring hands off Venezuela messages to the No Kings rallies. That's what we're doing. That's real activism. They have never done any real activism. They go to other people's shit and take selfies of themselves. Like, that's not real organizing. That's not real activism. They just, some church is doing volunteering. They go to it and they take a picture. Like, that's not organizing. You're not building any real apparatus, any real mutual aid or anything. It's just a publicity stunt. It's just a selfie, right? They're all about clout. All they care about is being internet famous, and they're boosted by the establishment and by the government, to basically try to take the spotlight away from CPI and to try and prevent people who want something like us, like the Center for Political Innovation, to just join their internet fandom. That's what they're doing, and they've had every chance in the world. If they were sincere, they would want to get along with me, but they're not. They're not sincere, right? They're frauds. They're frauds, and they're assholes. And that, again, I've been doing this for a long time. I speak about this stuff with way more depth than they do. I know what I'm doing. I met with Dugin in 2018 before anyone had ever heard of them, and I got my reputation destroyed for it by Israel and by the FBI. And these people met with Dugin a couple of years ago, and it was based. It was cool. That's funny. Usually when you meet with people that the American government hates, you generally get your reputation smeared for it. But for some reason, certain people got boosted for that. And the New York Times runs articles all about them. And yeah, we know what's going on here. We know what's going on here. And also ask them any basic political questions and see the answers that you'll get. They're frauds. They're frauds, and everyone knows it. So, and there's not much more that needs to be said about it. They're frauds. They copied what CPI was doing 3 or 4 years ago. And we've transcended that. We're in a new stage now, right? We're not doing the communism thing anymore. Well, they're doing the communism thing. So good luck to them, right? Good luck to them with that. Good luck. They're basically copying what we did 3 years ago. We've moved on to bigger and better things. So we're not even doing the same thing anymore. Yeah, that's all there is to it. So anyhow, next question. Iraq-Iran war and how it plays into Brzezinski's divide and conquer strategy. The U.S. going after both Iran and Iraq in the 2000s with the axis of evil. Yeah, well, right. Iraq, you had Ba'athist Arab socialism, which is a secular movement of Arab nationalists. In Iran, Iranians are ethnically Persian. They're not Arabs. And Shia Islam is a religious movement that advocates a religious government. Now, both of them became kind of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist movements. Both of them were anti-communist, and both Baathism and Shia stuff was boosted to some degree or other by the United States at various points as an alternative to communism. And in Iraq, the Ba'ath took power in the late 60s. And in Iran, the Shia took power. The Shia government took power in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution of Iran. And at first, the United States was more threatened by Iran and was backing Iraq. And then, halfway through the war, they switched, basically. And that was the arms for hostages thing that Reagan was doing and all of that. And that, to some degree or other, well, anyway, I could speculate about a lot of things. But, Iran pivoted into the U.S. camp closer to the USA in the late 80s. But then, like 1988, right, the USA shot down an Iranian airline, killed a bunch of Iranian civilians. And George Herbert Walker Bush refused to apologize, just a giant FU to Iran. That Iran was never, they may have courted Iran as an ally with the whole Iran-Contra thing, arms for hostages, that whole thing, but they never really supported Iran. It was like, we'll see you as useful against communism. And Iran made a big point of not being Soviet aligned, right? It was neither East nor West. And there was a famous thing where some Russian diplomat came to meet with Khomeini and he got up and walked out. And, at the time the USSR was falling, Khomeini wrote a letter to Gorbachev saying they shouldn't dissolve the USSR, but they should adopt Islam as their religion. And they should make it an Islamic country, and that, Khomeini was very anti-communist, but not against the economics of communism, against, Marxism, Leninism, against dialectical materialism, and he made that clear. Saddam Hussein, in his rhetoric, he was a little bit more friendly to the Soviets, but he also was very opposed to the communists in Iraq, and there were executions of communists, and he went back and forth, right? He was, sometimes he was friendlier to the Soviets and sometimes not. So it's complicated is the answer, right? That's generally how these things go. And yeah, the war went on for about a decade, and the USA was on both sides at various times, and Israel was on both sides at various times. And, it was that strategy of manipulating people against each other. I use the example of David and Goliath, right? The way you run a counterinsurgency, according to William S. Lind in his book, Fourth Generation Warfare, the Handbook of Fourth Generation Warfare, he says that, the story of David and Goliath has been told for 4,000 years. Who has ever sided with Goliath? Nobody. Everyone supports David. So the way you win an insurgency is you have Goliath step back. And then you create a bunch of Davids and have the Davids fight each other. And then Goliath says, look, I don't want to fight anybody. I just want stability. And look at these crazy Davids always fighting each other. And then Goliath wins by default. William S. Lind, he actually used the analogy he says that a counterinsurgency where an official like army battles a non-state actor is a lot like an adult giving a child, a very small child, a prolonged beating in a public place. No matter what the circumstances, people are going to sympathize with the child. They're going to stop the adult. It doesn't matter, right? People are going to see one person is amazingly bigger and stronger, and they're immediately going to sympathize with the child, and they're going to stop the adult, right? Because of the optics. And so when you wage a counterinsurgency, the way insurgents win is it's David and Goliath, right? That the military has cruise missiles and tanks and all of that, and these people are poor peasants on their roof with little rifles or spears or whatever, and people sympathize with them. So the art of counterinsurgency is changing those optics and making it so it doesn't look like David versus Goliath, right? And the way they do that is with counter gangs, right? Manipulating insurgents against each other. You have to change the lay of the land, right? And that it's a matter of using money and funds to manipulate things. Look, if you read, what I wrote about, I wrote my book, The Danger of an American Years of Lead, about the Luigi Mangione case. Do I have that book over here someplace? That's one of my better pieces, is my book, The Danger of an American Years of Lead. Right. And in that book, I talked about how the U.S. government is basically waging a counterinsurgency right now because the American people don't agree with them. The American people don't agree with them and are very angry and want things to change. And so they're trying to control the dissidents. And part of the counterinsurgency that the U.S. government is waging is, glorifying political violence and setting the stage for something like the years of lead in Italy, in America, and creating a layer of blood between dissidents. That's kind of the idea, right? And that we need to transcend that by offering real solutions, not offering destruction. We need to put forward real policies to advance the country and bring people of different political views together around them. That's the way to oppose that. And I wrote my book, The Danger of an American Years of Lead. And, that there you go. All righty. Okay, next question. What are your thoughts on the Uyghur claims in China? I agree with what Gray Zone revealed. From what I understand, the birth rate among Uyghurs is rising. China wanted to prevent an Islamic insurgency. That's what they were trying to do. And the way to do that was to provide jobs and to provide economic development. And that whole situation with the Uyghurs has very much stabilized. But the idea that China was trying to exterminate the Uyghurs as an ethnic group, that wasn't true. That was never the case. There was never any evidence of that. They were trying that a number of the Uyghur folks were teaching pan-Turkism and separatism and anti-communism in the schools. There was a crackdown on that, right? And then on top of that, they did go out of their way to kind of, stop, the radical Islamist stuff and to cultivate Islam. It's not against the government, right? They're building mosques all over the Uyghur regions. They have seminaries and stuff. They're not opposed to Islam. You just can't believe in Islam that wants to break away from China, right? So yeah, the Uyghur stuff is, at this point, it's old news, but there you go. Does anyone ever apologize to me? No, right? I said that. I said, no, they're not committing genocide against the Uyghurs. Oh, you're a Holocaust denier. Oh, does Vosh ever apologize? No, right? I get proven right on so many things, right? So there we go. All right. Now I see there's another question. Another buy me a coffee has come in, and I'll keep answering questions. I got some energy here. I do have to get up in the morning, but we'll see. I mean, I can keep answering questions here for a little bit. It's going well. So, all right. If you want to send a question, you can buy me a coffee, you can Rumble Rant, or you can Cash at me, Caleb Moffitt 22. Okay, so the next question is from African Fan. He said, how do you have such a grasp on society and history? Damn it. If you were English, would you choose the Green Party in the coming elections? No. Or they're just fronts like CPI? I don't know. CPI is not a front. Trump financed Ukrainian military after Obama before Biden. Why would you dismiss the fact that Trump could be a neocon secretly rooting for the war and just acts differently because of his experience in communication? Well, Trump works with neocons. I mean, John Bolton was in his first administration, and the neocon Marco Rubio is the head of the State Department, the Secretary of State, and they're pushing war against Venezuela. There's plenty of neocons around Trump, but at the same time, Trump. It's complicated. I don't think Trump is particularly ideological. I think he just wants to do whatever he thinks will benefit him. Right? What will get him remembered very well in the history books, what'll make him more popular, what'll, result in poll numbers going up. I think he would like to have a political legacy with his daughter maybe becoming the next president or Donnie Jr. I don't think that Trump is like an ideological non-neocon, but pushing populist buttons is how he got elected. And, he did emphasize no new wars, and that, he did meet with Kim Jong-un, which has never happened before, and that it's complicated. I don't think that Trump is like some, necessarily a full-on anti-neocon, but I don't think he's completely under their control. And that's why. I mean, and if you listen to the anti-Trump hysteria, he's not an imperialist. He's not on board. We worry that he's too friendly to Russia. They're worried. They see something there that they're afraid of. I believe they wouldn't be as afraid of Trump if there wasn't something for them to be afraid of. That said, yeah, Trump, they largely have controlled him so far. But every so often he does something that they don't like that benefits him because it's what the American people want, but it's something that they don't like. And that's an opening. We got to just make the best of what we have. But yeah, I don't think that Trump is necessarily, yeah, I'm not saying that he's the savior, and honestly, he's been a pretty shitty president so far. So yeah, I keep it real here. Would I choose the Green Party? No. In Britain, I think the Workers' Party of George Galloway is the best party by far. George Galloway, is a great anti-imperialist, and he's building a political party that's against the woke left, but is also socialist and for the working class and anti-imperialist. So if there were a party in the UK, I would support the Workers' Party of the UK. The Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, is also very good. They're very educational. They're very anti-imperialist, and they do a lot of great education work around anti-imperialism and stuff. And I know at one point they were kind of aligned with the Workers' Party, and there's still a relationship to some degree. But I'm an anti-imperialist. I'm an anti-imperialism. That's where I'm at. So the Green Party in Britain is not an anti-imperialist party. They're pro-imperialist. And how do I have such a grasp on society and history? Well, this is my life. This is what I focus on. And, I don't know. I could tell you, but there's always people who, like, on the one hand, they want what I have. I've worked very, very hard to accomplish what I've accomplished. I've done a lot, right? I've met multiple presidents. I have traveled around the world. I work in international television. My broadcasts are around there. I have books that have sold thousands of copies. I've accomplished a lot, right? I don't live in luxury. I live kind of a modest existence. I have an apartment in New York City where I live with my wife. I have a decent paycheck. I do okay. But I'm whatever, there's always somebody better than you. There's always somebody who's worse off, right? I do okay, but I've worked really hard for what I have. And the way I've gotten what I have is I'm obsessed. And yes, I am obsessed. I think about this stuff constantly. I have libraries full of books reading this stuff. I'm fascinated by it. I am very interested in this. And there's a lot of people who want what I have, but they don't want to actually do anywhere near the work that I've done for it, right? It's like they can't understand that, and it's been a continual problem that I encounter of people who meet me and are instantly jealous. They're instantly jealous, and they're also instantly annoyed by my personality. What do you do for fun, Caleb? Why don't you, don't you ever just hang out? Don't you ever just, and so they're annoyed by me being this way. And then they're also jealous of what I've accomplished. Well, it's like I accomplished what I have by being this way. So if you want what I have, be the way I am. Be obsessed, be focused, be hyper-focused, be vigilant, and you can have what I have. But if you're annoyed with how I am, don't expect to have what I have. Right? It's like you get where I've gotten by being very, 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 very focused, right? I am not normal. I am very, very, very interested in this stuff. I think about it 24/7. I focus on it. And if you don't like that about me, that's fine. You don't have to like it. I'm not in this to make you like me. I'm in this because I take it that seriously. But a number of people, it's like in their minds, me being the way I am and being this focused and being this knowledgeable and all of that, in their minds, that means I shouldn't have any success because I'm non-conforming, right? And instead, I should be punished for being the way I am because I'm weird. And it's this weird thing that people don't understand. You don't have great achievements by being normal. Right. It's like say someone's a really good athlete. They're an Olympic athlete. I have no athletic strength whatsoever. I'm not an athlete at all. But say somebody is a really, really good athlete. Would you go to them and say, why don't you just be normal? Why are you always practicing? Well, no, the reason that they're a very, very good athlete is because they practice all the time and they want to practice all the time. Whereas there's some people, it's like, well, they shouldn't be a successful athlete because they're not normal. They're always practicing. Well, no, actually, that's how they become a very successful athlete is they're very focused and they do what they're doing. And there's just this weird element of jealousy, resentment, and people not understanding that, in people's minds, they're over socialized. I believe it's over socialization. People have it in their minds that there's a lot of people. Look, I'll just be real with you all. A lot of people who get into our kind of politics hate themselves. They hate themselves. And I saw this in the boomer communist groups I was in, right? All the old communist groups are led by a guy right? Bob Avakian leads the Revolutionary Communist Party. Sam Webb, for many years, he led this Communist Party USA. I was in the Workers' World Party. It was led by a guy named Larry Holmes. And all these old boomers who are very smart, bookish people who are into communism, they hate themselves. And they would always say, you know, our leader is normal. Caleb, isn't it great? You know, Bob Avakian loves basketball. Bob Avakian, you know, he loves to talk about movies. Our leader is normal. And it's like, what the fuck? Right? And it's like, because they think I'm not normal. They hate themselves for being like this. And it's like, well, my leader is better than me because he's not normal. It's so sad. And in the Communist Party, it'd always be like, Sam Webb is so normal. Oh, he's so normal. He hangs out at bars. He watches football. He's so normal. Larry Holmes is so normal. Oh, he's just a normal dude. And it's like these self-hating people. They hate the fact that they're communists, right? And it's like they think that the leader of their group is better than them because he's so normal. It's so fucked up. It's so fucked up, right? I mean, it's really fucked up. Do you think Lenin was normal? Right? Read what people wrote about Lenin, the guy who lives and breathes and sleeps nothing but revolution 24 hours a day. He was constantly having panic attacks because he was so obsessed. Lenin was not normal. Stalin was not normal. Mao Zedong was not normal, right? You know, people don't achieve great things by being normal. They just don't, right? But there's this weird self-hatred among communists of they hate themselves for not being normal. And, you know, obviously that's even worse in certain trends, you know, on social media. It's even worse, right? It's like, you know, I meet people, I can't join the communists, you know, the ACP because I don't lift enough. If I just lift enough, maybe I'll be bro enough to join them. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You know, I mean, it's like pathetic. I mean, it's pathetic. And they, you know, there's an element of like weaponizing people's self-hatred and manipulating it against them. I don't want you to hate yourself, right? I don't. I will say one thing about the Schiller Institute, the LaRoucheites, the National Caucus of Labor Committees. One of their criticisms of the new communist movement that they made, and I watched a series of classes that they had where they talked about you know, they talked about, you know, how they evolved. They were originally a Marxist group. Now that changed. They stopped being a Marxist group, but they were originally a Marxist group in the 70s called the National Caucus of Labor Committees. And one thing about them is they said they didn't go for any of that. The strategy in the 70s in the new communist movement was all these communists got jobs in factories and they tried to be normal, right? And the idea was they would know a lot about baseball and they'd be a fun guy to hang out at the bar with. And then when the crisis came, they would lead their coworkers to revolution because they would just be so normal. And the National Caucus of Labor Committees, to their credit, they said, no, we don't want to tell people we're normal and we know the most about baseball. We want to impress upon people that we're smart and show them that we have solutions that will improve their lives. And they also said one of the main criticisms that people from the, you know, the new communist movement would give the National Caucus of Labor Committees was they would say to them, why are you always trying to save the system? Right? Why are you always trying to save the system, right? You always have a plan to restructure the banking system, to build all this infrastructure. We should want the system to fall so that we can have a bloody revolution. And they'd say, well, why should the working class listen to us if we're not trying to improve their lives? We're not trying to create chaos. We're trying to assert, you know, that we as the vanguard, as a group of people that understand how the world works, have solutions that can improve things. And actually, if you look at every revolution that has actually happened, the communists don't put forward burn it down, tear it down. They put forward actual solutions to make things better, and that the crisis propels them into power, not because they're offering more chaos. The system is falling apart and already creating chaos. They offer stability, right? There was already chaos in Russia in 1917, and the Bolsheviks offered peace, land, and bread. They offered a program to a way out of the chaos. And in the 1930s, the Communist Party, their slogan was the revolutionary way out of the crisis. Or in 1940, it was the way out, right? They're offering the way out. Like they're not offering instability. People don't want their lives to be more chaotic. People want stability. But the middle class left, the new left, again, read Trotsky and the Neoconservatives, the new left, they don't think that way. And so, like, the idea, the new communist movement, they wanted all their people to be normal so that their coworkers would listen to them. Well, actually, no, people don't want normal people. They want somebody who knows what they're talking about, somebody who seems smart. And on top of that, they said, well, why are you offering solutions to actually improve people's lives? Well, that's what people want. They don't want chaos and instability. They want their lives to get better. So, I am not a LaRoucheist, but, I do give the National Caucus of Labor Committees credit. I do believe that the reason Lyndon LaRouche went to federal prison is because of all the communist groups that existed in the 60s and 70s, they were too good at it, right? All the communist groups, there was like this little space that they could occupy. Right, this little space that they were allowed to occupy. And especially after the rise of Ronald Reagan, they all just kind of found this little irrelevant space that they could occupy, the communist groups. The National Caucus of Labor Committees, the LaRoucheites, to their credit, they found a way to make themselves relevant, and they were having, big infomercials on American television all through the 80s, and they were winning Democratic primaries in the 80s. They were not in a confined space, and they were aligned with Saddam Hussein. They were very friendly with Saddam Hussein and Ba'athist Arab socialism in Iraq, and that they found a way to be a relevant part of the discourse. And that's why the Bush administration was so threatened by them and prosecuted them and sent the FBI to just break up the organization. Because they were good at what they did. The communist groups, especially after the early 80s, they really stopped being relevant. And even then, they were very well controlled. But the National Caucus of Labor Committees, to their credit, they knew what they were doing. Now, there's a lot that you can criticize about the organization. And, but that's one thing about them is that they had an element, they were a little bit smarter than the communist groups. And that one thing is they weren't trying to be normal, right? They're like, we love classical music. We read Plato and Aristotle. They weren't trying to be normal, right? And that was part of it. So, yeah, I don't want CPI members to be normal. I want them to be exceptional, right? That's what I want. I want you to be smart. I want you to be brilliant. I want you to be, able to do things that normal people cannot do, right? I'm not trying to get, and part of the problem there's a layer of people who have succumbed to Khrushchevism, but part of the lead up to their succumbing to Khrushchevism, right, is this self-hatred. I'm an anti-imperialist, but I want to not be. I want to not be weird. I want to not be a nerd. I want to, well, you got to get over that, right? If you think, look, even Brian Becker, there was an interview Brian Becker gave where he was going on and on about these groups are weird. He was going after Jose Vega and saying that, Jose Vega's group was weird. And I'm laughing. Yeah. If you're an American and you support China and North Korea and Cuba, you're already weird. And it's like, but PSL is like in denial about that, right? They think somehow, well, having these, views that are fundamentally at odds with the prevailing views of U.S. society, but somehow they'll not act like they read books and people are going to think they're normal. No, if you have anti-imperialist views in America, you're weird. If you have illiberal views in America, you're weird. Right. And you have to embrace that and you have to turn that into a strength and you have to find a way to be effective and utilize and make your deviance, your deviance from the norm count and be effective and be an impactful person. Right. There are people, and we all know them, that are weird in a way that leads to them being very ineffective. They can't hold a job. They have mental health issues. They can't focus. Right. People that are deviant from the norm in a way that hurts them. Well, you need to find a way to be deviant from the norm in a way that advances you. Right. That's the thing, right? That's what I've done is I'm not normal, but I've figured out a way that, in my knowing about what I know about, being passionate about what I'm passionate about, I found a way to make it work. That's what I want you to do. I want you to find a way, and I want this organization to be a place that are somebody that takes up history's challenge and takes these ideas seriously, can use your intellect and your passion in an effective way and change the world. I don't want you to be normal because that would defeat the whole point. Okay, what do you think about Igor Berkut's backup Israel map in 2019? Is it now only Odessa? I have no idea. I've never heard of that. Right? Backup Israel. What are you talking about? I've never heard of that. I know about the Jewish autonomous region that existed in the USSR in the past, but I have no idea. What you were talking about. Right? You lost me there. Right? Backup Israel. I've never heard of that. I have never heard of that, right? There was the Jewish Autonomous Region in the USSR created by Stalin, a national territory for Jews. That's where the world's largest menorah exists, but I've never heard of backup Israel. I've never heard of that. Never heard of that, my friend. I'm sorry. That's one thing that I have never heard of. But on that note, I guess we'll probably end it here. It's been fun, everybody. So tomorrow night, 9 p.m., we're going to do a call-in stream. So if you have a webcam, you can come on and talk to me about whatever you want. I'm leaving town hopefully on Tuesday. Fingers crossed, waiting for, the final T's and Q's to be, they say crossing the T's and dotting the I's. I'm waiting for all of that to be in order. But it looks like I'm leaving town on Tuesday. So if that's the case, well, I'm just definitely doing a call-in stream tomorrow night. So come on tomorrow night. It'll be fun. All right, I'm going to put on the closing music. It's been fun. Yeah, we'll be back. Thanks, everybody. Dare to struggle, dare to win. We live in very strange times, but we're all doing our best. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.